Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. They say no one lives past 37 on Harrowick Lane. The street sign had rusted down to a bent hunk of corroded iron, leaning like a weary old man over the cracked asphalt. The trees lining the road, twisted oaks and ash, stretched long bony arms across the path, blotting out the sun. The air smelled wrong here, too sweet in a cloying, almost rotten way, as if something had died and hadn't finished decaying. That was the first thing Harper noticed. The second thing was the mailbox, number 113. It looked newer than everything else, too clean. The red flag was up, a bright cherry red, like it had been painted yesterday. And yet, no one had lived in the house for 18 years. She checked the letter in her hand again. No sender. Just her name and this address. The envelope was stiff, heavy, like it held more than just a message. But when she opened it, it was empty. Just the scent of cedar and a faint rust-colored smudge in the corner. She should have turned around then. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when laced with just enough personal mystery to draw you forward. Her mother used to whisper about Harrowick when she thought Harper was asleep. Words like cursed, watching, and what happened to Sam would drift down the hallway like smoke. Harper had never met Sam. Only seen the photo once, before her mother had burned it in the sink. Now here she was, 29 years old, standing in front of 113 Harrowick Lane. The house waited. It didn't loom. This wasn't some looming mansion with gargoyles and shattered windows. It was worse. It looked normal. Ordinary. The kind of house you forget even after walking past it. The pale blue paint had faded, but not peeled. The porch creaked gently in the breeze, but didn't sag. The blinds were drawn, the front door closed, but the lights inside flickered like someone had just walked through. She should have walked away. Instead, she stepped up the porch stairs, each one moaning beneath her weight, not from age, but from something else, like resistance. The door opened before she touched it. Inside smelled like old books, lavender, and something coppery beneath it all. Barely there, but enough to raise the hairs on her arms. The hallway was lined with photos, all in black and white. She didn't recognize the faces, but the eyes, they all had the same strange, cloudy gaze. Not blind, not seeing. Like they were looking through the frame. She reached out to touch one, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. There was a faint voice behind her. Not words, just breath. When she spun around, the hallway was empty, but the front door was closed now, locked. She hadn't closed it. Something whispered again. She didn't check the door. Instead, Harper walked deeper inside. The walls here seemed to grow closer. The photographs changed the farther she went. Older, rougher. Some looked centuries old. There was a man in one frame who had no mouth, a woman whose smile stretched far too wide, and in one corner frame, a photo of a boy, Sam. She knew without knowing. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth open in a scream that had no sound. The background behind him wasn't the house. It was something black and endless, like a pit or void. But his hands were reaching out, like he was being pulled in. There was something behind him in the photo. Long fingers. Wet. Wrong. Harper blinked. The photo was empty now. Just blackness where Sam had been. A thump echoed from upstairs. She turned her head slowly, every instinct screaming at her to leave, but her legs moved forward. She climbed the staircase. Each step felt like pushing against invisible water, thick and cold. The hallway upstairs was darker, though there were no lights out. Every door was slightly open. One at the end was wide open. From it came the sound of humming. A woman's voice, soft and shaking slightly off-key. A lullaby, one Harper hadn't heard since she was 5. Her mother's voice. Sleep, little crow, the sky's turning red. The stars are all watching, the shadows are fed. She stepped into the room. It was a nursery. Dust lay thick over every surface. Toys from another era lined the shelves. A mobile hung above a wooden crib, spinning on its own. The crib was empty, but there were scratches on the inside of the wooden rails. Deep gouges, like something had tried to climb out. Harper stepped closer and froze. On the floor was a stuffed owl. One eye missing, feathers stained dark. She had this same owl when she was a child. Only hers had burned in the house fire when she was 6. How could it be here? She picked it up. The lights died, pitch black, but the mobile still spun. Then the music started. Not a lullaby, not anything human, just a slow, stretched-out note that bent and warped, like a violin string tightening until it snapped. A breath against her ear. I missed you, Harper. The lights came back on. The room was empty. But the owl was gone. Her fingers were empty, even though she could feel the weight of it still there. She ran. Down the stairs. Through the corridor, past the photos. The door wouldn't open. She banged, kicked, screamed. Behind her, footsteps began, slow, steady, one at a time, walking down the stairs behind her. She didn't look back. She turned and ran toward the kitchen. Something moved just outside her vision. The house had changed. The layout wasn't right anymore. Rooms where there shouldn't be. Doors that led to brick walls. Windows that looked into other rooms instead of outside. She found the basement door. Open. Steps leading down into pitch. No other way. She descended. The smell hit her before the light. Rot, metal, and that same cedar note from the envelope. At the bottom was a room, concrete, wet, molded, and in the middle, a chair. Straps, dried blood, and across the wall in cracked, faded red THUSE Taro UHUS. Next to it, a mirror, not a reflection. A moving image. Sam again, older now. Not a boy, her age, covered in ash and dirt, eyes wild, mouth moving silently. Behind him, a shape, enormous, limbs wrong, skin like old leather, no face, just teeth, too many. Sam reached toward the glass, pressed his hands to it. Mouth, he said. She couldn't hear it, but she read his lips. Mouth. Then, don't speak. The lights in the basement flickered. The chair creaked. It had moved. Empty seconds ago. Now it was facing her. The straps open, inviting. The mirror cracked. She ran back up the stairs. Or tried. The stairs stretched. One step, then another, and another. Then the door at the top opened. But it wasn't the kitchen anymore. It was woods, dead trees, no sky. Just a red glow like burning coals beyond the branches. She stepped through, because the house was shifting again. Behind her, the door slammed shut and vanished. No house, just trees. And a path, with broken dolls nailed to every trunk on either side. They watched her with glass eyes. One blinked. She ran, not sure how long. Her legs burned. Her breath tore from her chest. The path kept shifting, spiraling, looping. Then she saw it, a cabin old, shattered, but real. She ran inside, bolted the door, then turned, and froze. On the wall, newspaper clippings, dozens. All the same headline, Hana 113 Haro aka different names, different dates, each 7 years apart. Each photo the same house. But every woman looked like her, almost exactly. Some had longer hair, some darker eyes, but the same jaw, same scar above the lip, her face, each time. She turned to the last article. Date August 2nd, today, name Harper Wynn. Her photo, aged, black and white. Headline, Sage never left. Then, a knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. Then a whisper from behind her, you opened it. Now it opens you. The floor split. The dolls screamed. And the red light poured in. Harper wasn't falling, she was being dragged. The moment the floor cracked beneath her, the light swallowed everything. It wasn't just light, it had weight, density, like a burning fog pressing against her skin. The sound was worse. It wasn't a scream, it was all screams, threaded into a single roar that rang from the inside of her bones. There was no up or down anymore, no air to breathe, only the sense that her body was being stretched in directions it was never meant to go. And then it stopped. She hit solid ground with a thud, coughing and gasping as the heat pulled away from her skin like something reluctant to let her go. She was no longer in the cabin. No longer in the woods. Not even inside the house, this place was older. Wetter. She pushed herself up, hands sinking into dark soil that squelched between her fingers like something alive. Around her, massive trees loomed, but they weren't like anything on earth. Too straight, too tall, their bark smooth and gray like skin. The leaves above were black, and where sunlight should have pierced the canopy, the red glow still pulsed steadily. It wasn't the sun. It came from under the trees, from the shadows between roots, and something was watching. She didn't see it. Not at first. But the weight of the stare pressed in from every direction, making her nerves jump under her skin. The hairs on her arms stood on end. Her heartbeat kicked into overdrive, thudding like a drum against her ribs. Her instincts screamed one thing: don't move. But Harper had never been the type to freeze. She stood, wiping dirt from her face, and spun slowly. The forest stretched endlessly, but there was a path, narrow, lined with bones. Some small, like birds or rodents, others longer, human. She didn't want to walk it, but she didn't want to stay still either. So she chose forward. The path was slick and twisted like something had dragged itself along it 1,000 times. The bones beside it clicked and trembled as she passed, but never moved. Not really. Just the suggestion of movement, like they were waiting for her to turn around. After a while, she saw the house again. Not the same as before. Similar in structure, but made of different things now. Roots instead of wood, windows like wet glass that pulsed faintly. The front door was cracked open. Inside, it was dark. But above it, something was carved into the gable in a looping, spidery script. She recognized the last word. Harrow. She stepped inside. The floor was damp, the walls curved slightly inward as if the house was breathing. But the photos were gone, but something else lined the walls now. Hands. Imprints. Hundreds of them in different sizes. Some were charred. Some were little more than stains. Each was pressed into the surface, as if the wall had once been soft enough to take them. And then there was the sound. A ticking. Steady, slow, coming from the far end of the hall. She moved toward it, the house groaning softly with each step like it disapproved. The ticking grew louder, sharper. And then she saw it. A grandfather clock built into the wall like it had grown there. The wood was rotted, but the pendulum swung, not side to side, but back and forth toward her, then away, toward her, then away. She stared too long, because behind the pendulum, she saw something else, an eye, just one. Floating in the darkness inside the clock, wide and unmoving, watching her. She took a step back, and the pendulum stopped. The eye blinked, and then the wall to her right opened with a sudden snap, like a throat unhinging. A long, narrow hallway revealed itself, lined with doors. Each door had a number. Each number had a name carved underneath. Names she knew: Lucy Hendricks, Mallory Yates, June Carpenter, Sam Wynn, her brother, all dead, all tied to Heroic Lane. But the last door didn't have a name. Just a reflection, her own face, in a warped mirror where the nameplate should have been. Her reflection smiled. She didn't, and the door swung open. Inside was a room filled with fog. Thick, moving. The walls were shifting behind it, like the room couldn't hold a stable shape. But in the center, something hung from the ceiling by long, fleshy ropes, dozens of small objects, swaying like pendulums. She stepped closer. They were teeth. Human. Children's. Strung together like wind chimes, clinking softly with each breath of unseen air. The sight turned her stomach, but it was the sound beneath the clinking that made her blood run cold. A child's voice. Singing. No words. Just that same lullaby again. The same one her mother used to hum. Then, another voice layered beneath it. Older. Rough. Male. See, she opened it. Yes, she let the house see. Now it wears her face. Harper spun, expecting something, someone. But there was no one there. Just the fog thickening, crawling along her skin like fingers. A thump. Then another, from inside the walls. Shapes pressed against them. Hands, feet, mouths, pushing, clawing. like something just beneath the surface wanted out. Then she saw the eye again, high above her, embedded in the ceiling. Same eye. Always the same. Watching. And the moment her gaze locked with it, the fog dropped to the floor like water, revealing what lay beneath. It was a trapdoor. Old. Splintered. With a symbol carved into it, a spiral inside a mouth. Her fingers moved on their own. She pulled it open. The smell hit her like a wall. Rot feces, blood, burnt hair, and a ladder leading down. Before she could second guess, something touched her ankle. She dropped, not down the ladder, past it, through space, through dark, and landed in a corridor lined with flesh. It pulsed like veins. The walls were wet, made of something alive, twitching with her footsteps. The air was thick and red, and the silence here wasn't true silence. It had breath, a soft inhale, a slower exhale. This place was alive. Not metaphorically, it lived. And as she walked, the corridor opened wider, revealing hundreds of cages built into the walls. Inside each was a person, eyes open, mouths sewn shut. Some were screaming behind the stitches. Some banged their heads against the bars over and over, silently, and one had her face. A perfect copy. It sat cross-legged, watching her with eyes full of pity. Not fear, not anger, just disappointment. "Why?" Harper whispered, before she could stop herself. The stitched version of her slowly raised a finger and pointed behind Harper. She turned and came face to face with it. Not the eye this time. The thing behind it. The shape from the photo. The one behind Sam. It was taller than the hallway. Its limbs moved wrong, elbows bending backwards, knees rotating slowly in spirals. No mouth, just a hole where a mouth should have been. Teeth circled it endlessly, never biting, just spinning. Its chest opened with a loud crack to reveal a hollow ribcage full of dolls, some broken, some bleeding. It leaned close, sniffed her. Then, from its chest, it pulled a photo. Her, standing in front of the house. Only she was smiling and holding the owl. The version in the photo whispered something she couldn't hear, but she could read the words on her lips. "Let me out." The creature offered the photo like a gift. She didn't take it. Instead, she reached up, against all instinct, and touched the spinning teeth. There was no pain, only cold, and then, in a rush, everything snapped. The hallway, the cages, the flesh, gone. She was lying in the middle of Heroic Lane, dirt on her skin, blood under her nails, and the mailbox at a 113. Still there, red flag still up, but the house, gone. No house, no porch. Just an empty lot choked with weeds and broken toys. A rusted for sale sign squeaked softly in the wind. She got to her feet slowly, shaking, and turned to leave. Then froze. Across the street, a woman stood watching, holding a letter. Same envelope. Same cedar scent in the air. The woman looked just like her, but older, and when she raised her hand to wave, Harper saw the stitches across her mouth. Harper didn't wave back. She couldn't. Her muscles were stone, breath locked in her chest, eyes fixed on the woman across the street who wore her face like a borrowed mask. The stranger's stitched mouth curved, not into a smile. Not exactly, but something close. As if she was pleased Harper had made it this far, as if she had been expecting her. And then the wind shifted. The woman blinked, stepped backward into the shadow of a tree, and vanished. No sound. No movement. One moment there, the next gone. Just empty space and the sudden, crushing silence of a street that had been waiting too long. Harper backed away slowly, eyes scanning the overgrown lot where the house used to be. It hadn't been torn down. That much was obvious. There were no construction remains, no foundation, no debris, just weeds and silence. Like the earth had swallowed it whole and digested the memory, until nothing but the whisper of it remained. But the mailbox was still there, and the flag was still up. Her hand moved against her will, pulled by a thought not quite her own, and lifted the flap. Inside was another envelope. This one was thicker. No address, no name, just a symbol scrawled in rust, red ink across the front, a spiral within a mouth, just like the trapdoor had shown. She opened it with trembling fingers and pulled out a stack of photographs. Dozens of them, all of her. Different ages, different places, different lives, but all unmistakably her. One showed her as a child standing on the porch of a house she didn't remember living in. Another, in her late teens, staring through a cracked mirror that reflected not her face, but her stitched double. There was even one of her sleeping, just last night in her apartment. The curtains drawn, her mouth slightly open. She hadn't heard a thing. At the bottom of the stack was a note, faint, written in jagged pencil, like the writer's hand was shaking, "You are the seventh. The house needs 8. Close the door before it feeds again, or it will open wider." Harper stared at the words until they blurred. 8? 8 what? Victims. Versions. Doors. Then something tugged at her memory. The articles in the cabin. Every death 7 years apart. Always on August 2nd. Always women. Always her. She had seen 6 photos before. She was the 7th. And that meant one more was coming. Or had already come. Her hands shook. The photos fell from her grip and scattered across the sidewalk like autumn leaves. In one, her stitched twin peeked from behind a curtain. In another, Harper stood in the same woods from the other place, the place beneath the house, with her eyes gouged out and the doll owl clutched to her chest. She ran. Down Harrowick Lane, past the suffocating trees, past the rusted street sign, past the whispers that crawled across the back of her neck. She didn't stop until she reached her car, breath ragged, hands fumbling the keys, eyes darting to every shadow. But when she opened the door, she froze again. The rearview mirror was missing, and in its place, a photograph had been taped. Another photo of her, but not like the others. In this one, she was laughing. Genuinely. Free. But the background was wrong. She was standing in a room made of red walls that pulsed like veins. The same dolls from the forest lined the shelves, and behind her, looming just over her shoulder, was the creature. The one with the teeth and the eye. And she was smiling, like she belonged there. The sky turned dark far too quickly, as if night fell not from time, but from choice. The clouds rolled in unnaturally fast, heavy and low like smoke ready to suffocate the town. The street lights flickered and died, one by one. No insects buzzed, no wind stirred, no animals dared call. Something was coming, something hungry. Harper drove. She didn't remember starting the engine, or backing out, or turning down the first 2 streets. Her mind spun in circles, trying to make sense of the impossible logic that now governed her world. The house was gone, but the house wasn't a house. It was a place, a presence, a mouth that opened for certain people at certain times, and somehow her life had been orbiting it since childhood. She thought of her mother, the lullaby, the whispered names, the fire. Her brother, Sam, hadn't died in the fire. He'd been taken. And the only thing her mother had left behind was the burn mark in the shape of a spiral on the floorboards. Harper parked in front of the nursing home without even thinking. Her mother had been here for years. Unresponsive, staring at the wall, whispering nonsense, if she spoke at all. But Harper had never asked the right questions, never really listened, not until now. The receptionist didn't stop her. The doors seemed to part before she reached them. The hallway lights flickered above her as she passed, and for a moment the pictures on the walls, all paintings of peaceful landscapes, turned to photos of screaming faces, and then back again. Room 219. She opened the door. Her mother sat in the corner, still, pale, eyes wide and staring into nothing, but her lips were moving. Harper stepped closer, the hairs on her neck rising. The words weren't English. They were that same stretched, sick lullaby tune, but the lyrics were wrong, backwards, twisted, like someone had taken language and taught it how to rot. She dropped to her knees in front of her mother, grabbed her trembling hands, and said softly, "Mom, it's happening again." For the first time in 15 years, her mother's eyes focused. Clear, terrified, and she whispered, Barely loud enough to hear, "You never left, Harper. You think you did." But once it sees you, tears slipped down her face. "Oh, you're already part of it." Harper choked back a sob. "There's a door," she said. "A real one. A final one. I saw it. It's still open." Her mother's hands tightened. "You have to find the eighth." Harper shook her head. "What does that mean? Who is it?" A long pause. Then her mother answered. "You." Silence. Not the kind that fills a room. The kind that empties one. Something broke inside Harper's chest. Like a weight that had been building her whole life just dropped. Her stomach turned. Her mind reeled. She backed away slowly. "I don't understand." "You will," her mother whispered. "When the house comes back." And then she began to hum. That lullaby. Over and over. Harper fled the room. The hallway had changed. It was longer. Stretching toward something not meant for this world. The lights died behind her, one at a time. The walls grew slick. The air wet. She wasn't in the nursing home anymore. She was back inside it. Not the house. It the mouth. And this time, it didn't want to scare her. It wanted to welcome her. A hallway stood before her now, framed by wood that looked soaked in something black and alive. At the end of it was a door. Carved into it a spiral, swallowing itself. This was the door. The one the note had warned her about. The one she had to close. But when she stepped forward, something called her name. Soft, childlike. "Harper." She turned and saw him. Sam. Standing at the top of a staircase that hadn't been there a second ago. He looked older, bruised, but alive. Eyes tired, mouth trembling. "You don't have to fight it," he whispered. "It just wants you to remember. It's always been you. You started it." She stepped back. "No." "Yes," he said gently. "Before the house there was you. You were the first. You don't remember. But I do." He raised a shaking finger. "You opened the very first door. You brought it here. You are the eighth." And then the floor trembled. The walls groaned. The spiral on the door began to turn, slowly, grinding against the wood like a key twisting in a lock. Harper screamed and lunged for it, desperate to shut it before it opened too far. But the moment her hands touched the wood, her memories shattered. She was 5 again, standing in the basement, her hand on the trapdoor, smiling, humming, and beneath her, the teeth turned. The house hadn't found her. It had been born from her. The memory didn't just return. It erupted, searing through Harper's mind with the force of a long, buried scream finally finding its voice. Her body convulsed as the image burned itself into her consciousness. A little girl with wild hair and soot on her cheeks, kneeling on cold basement stone, her fingers brushing the edge of an old trapdoor smeared with a red spiral. She wasn't scared. She was smiling. She was humming that same lullaby in a rhythm too steady, too old to belong to a child. And her mouth was moving, but the words weren't hers. Something else was speaking through her, something using her. Harper reeled from the door, falling backward as if the memory itself had pushed her. The hallway was vibrating now, walls quivering with a sick rhythm like a heartbeat struggling to keep pace. The spiral on the door pulsed, once, twice, and then began spinning faster, drawing the eye in, demanding attention. She forced herself to look away, sweat beating at her temple, heart hammering like it was trying to outrun the truth unraveling inside her. She had opened it. Not recently. Not last week. Not yesterday. Years ago. She was the breach. The tear. The child who smiled as the mouth opened. The one who invited it in. But why? Why her? The air grew thick, sticky, as if the house was remembering too. As if it recognized her not as a visitor, not even as prey, but as something far worse, a traitor returning home. The walls around her pulsed once, then tore open with a wet shriek, revealing a room she had never seen before, but instinctively knew. It was a circular chamber. 8 high-backed chairs sat in a ring, each carved from different kinds of wood: oak, birch, aspen, cedar, and others she couldn't name. 7 were occupied by versions of her, each one older, each one changed. The first was a little girl with blood on her hands and soot on her dress. Her eyes were gone, burned out, and her mouth moved in silent, endless song. The second was a teenager, wrists wrapped in gauze, tears streaking down a face that stared into nothing. The third was mid-20s, sitting stiffly with a look of glassy-eyed horror frozen on her face, lips stretched into a smile stitched at the corners. Each one represented a different part of Harper's life. Each one had died in a different way, but all were her, and the eighth chair, the one directly across from the door, was empty, waiting for her. Behind her, the hallway collapsed into itself like lungs deflating. The house was closing in, pushing her toward the circle. The room groaned with hunger. There was no way back, only in, only deeper. She stepped across the threshold. The silence inside was thick, unbroken even by breath. The other Harpers didn't move, didn't blink, but she could feel them, watching her, judging her, blaming her. She walked to the center, unable to stop herself, and placed her hand on the empty chair. The spiral etched into the seat began to glow faintly. And then they all stood, every version of her, in perfect unison, and they began to speak. Their voices layered over one another, not shouting, not whispering, just a chorus of truths she had buried so deeply even nightmares hadn't found them. You were the first to lie. You told them it was imaginary. You laughed when Sam cried. You taught the house to wait. You closed the door but left it breathing. You forgot us. You let it grow. Harper shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. No, I was a child. I didn't know. But the room didn't care. The spiral beneath her feet grew wider, stretching across the floor like an oil slick, swallowing the ground. Her other selves moved in a slow circle around her now, chanting, humming, mouths moving in warped sync. The lullaby echoed louder and louder until it was all she could hear. Sleep, little crow. The sky's turning red. The words dug into her skull like hooks. Other stars are all watching. The shadows are fed. She fell to her knees. Memories flooded in. Real ones this time, not twisted illusions. Her mother screaming as the basement door slammed shut. Sam begging her not to go down there. The sound of the fire starting. Her hand on the match. Her voice small, distant. Whispering, it wants to be warm again. And then, silence. The spiral stopped spinning, and in the center of the floor, where nothing had been a moment ago, a figure stood. Sam, but not the one she'd seen before. This version was new, whole, older than he ever lived to be, dressed in black, skin pale as moonlight, eyes full of rage and something worse. Betrayal. You made a deal, he said, his voice hollow. You fed it. You were supposed to stay. I didn't understand, she said, voice cracking. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just a child. No, Sam said you weren't. Not then. Not when it mattered. You knew. You liked the way it listened to you. You liked being the only one it spoke to. He stepped closer, shadows curling around his feet. You liked opening the door. The words hit her like fists. He wasn't wrong. There had been a moment, a single heartbeat. Long ago, when the idea of something listening, something ancient and powerful and secret, had made her feel special, important, even loved. She had fed it her loneliness, and it had grown teeth. I can close it, she said. I will close it. Let me fix it. Sam tilted his head, watching her the way a predator watches an injured thing struggling to stand. No one fixes the mouth. It doesn't break. It waits. You gave it that. She stood. She had to. The room felt like a throat now, the walls curving inward, the spiral beginning to spin again, faster this time. Her other selves began to dissolve into ash, one by one, whispering apologies and accusations as they vanished. The chair burst into flame. But Harper stepped into the center of the spiral, stood tall, and screamed into the house. I remember. I remember everything. And I'm not yours. The room shook. The walls cracked. The spiral screamed. And then, just like that, it stopped. Stillness, then darkness, real darkness, and then a floor beneath her. concrete, cold. She opened her eyes. She was in her apartment, her bed. Morning sunlight streamed in through the windows. Birds chirped. A kettle whistled. And for a moment, just one moment, it felt like it was over. But when she stood and looked in the mirror, her mouth was stitched shut, and the reflection blinked. Harper didn't scream. She couldn't. The stitches across her lips tugged tight the moment her mouth opened. Pain flared down her jaw like fire dragged through her skin, and all that escaped was a guttural choke, muffled and panicked. Her reflection stared back, impassive, unblinking, and it didn't mimic her movements. When she stumbled backward in terror, her reflection stayed rooted in place. Still as a corpse, with eyes that gleamed with something not human. Not anymore. The apartment was wrong. At first glance, everything was in its place. Curtains drawn open, kitchen counter cluttered with dishes, coat draped on the hook by the door. But the light was too still, like a frozen photograph of morning. The shadows didn't shift. The breeze from the window didn't move the curtain. There was no noise from the street. No cars. No footsteps above from the neighbors' always heavy boots. Just an aching silence, as if the entire world had inhaled and never let go. She staggered away from the mirror. One hand pressed over her stitched mouth, the other reaching for the phone on the kitchen table. The screen was black, wouldn't turn on. No matter how hard she pressed, it stayed lifeless. When she yanked the charger from the wall, she noticed something else. There was no cord, only the plug, no wire, just an illusion of normalcy. Like the house, or whatever this place was, had built a version of her life out of memory and shadows, but hadn't gotten all the details right. It didn't need to. It just needed her to believe it long enough to settle in, to stay. She turned back to the mirror. Her reflection was smiling now. Its head tilted, the way Sam had tilted his, like it knew her better than she knew herself. It raised a hand slowly and traced a finger down the glass, leaving behind a red smear, blood, the same deep rust-colored stain that had been on the envelope. The mirror began to ripple, not crack, ripple, like water, and then her reflection stepped out. There was no sound, no shattering, just a gentle folding, as if the world had been holding its breath for this exact moment. The thing that wore her face landed on the floor without grace, like a puppet dropped from the sky, and slowly straightened its limbs one at a time. She backed away, heart clawing at her ribs, every muscle screaming to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The stitched doppelge Inger blinked once, then reached up and pulled at the stitches on its mouth one by one. Each thread came free with a sickening wet pop. It didn't bleed. It didn't flinch. It simply smiled wider. And then it spoke with Harper's voice, but not her words. Home is where you never left. It walked toward her, barefoot, slow, deliberate. Harper backed into the kitchen, grabbed the closest object, a knife, and held it up with shaking hands. The double stopped, head tilted. Violence won't save you. Not anymore. That was the old way. Fire, knives, running. You've seen where that leads. Harper tried to speak, forgetting the stitches, and pain lanced through her again. Blood soaked the corners of her mouth. The double leaned in, its voice turning syrupy, patient, kind. You don't need a mouth here. You had your chance to scream. Now it's time to listen. Then the thing did something Harper couldn't explain. It turned around and reached into nothing. A slit opened in the air, like a wound in reality, and the doppelganger pulled something through. It was a door. Small, no taller than Harper's waist. Wooden, ancient, pulsing softly with warmth. Carved into it that same spiral in a mouth. The double placed the door on the floor between them, and sat down beside it like a mother beside a crib. You're going to remember now, it said, and it began to knock on the door. 3 slow knocks. The room responded. The shadows shifted. The curtains twitched. The light dimmed to that familiar red glow, and then the door opened. Only a crack. Just enough. A small hand reached out from the darkness. A child's hand, burned, bloodied. Harper gasped. She knew that hand. It was hers. From that night in the basement, the night she smiled, the night she opened the first door and let something in. The hand beckoned. Come back. Finish what you started. Her double looked up, voice calm. There's only one way forward. You can't kill this. You can't escape it. You birthed it. And it's hungry. Harper dropped the knife. The truth was too big to deny now. This was no haunting, no possession. This was inheritance, legacy, and it came from her. A memory returned then, clearer than the rest. Not from the fire, not from the night her brother vanished. Before that, her mother, whispering as she tucked Harper into bed, "They came to me first, but I gave them you. I'm sorry. You were just easier to open." Harper collapsed. The weight of it knocked the wind from her lungs. Her mother had known, had sent her to the basement that night, humming that cursed lullaby, guiding her tiny hands toward the trapdoor that throbbed like a second heartbeat under the house. She hadn't been the victim. She'd been the offering, and she had accepted. Across from her, the small door opened wider. The child stepped through. A perfect, ash-covered version of Harper at 5 years old, eyes wide, innocent, empty. She walked toward grown Harper and stopped at her feet, raised her hand, touched Harper's stitched mouth, the threads unraveled like silk, peeling free with no pain this time. Only silence. Then the child said, in her voice a say it. Harper stared at her. She knew the words. She always had. They were carved into her, hidden in the marrow of her bones, left behind by something too old to have a name. But saying them meant surrender. It meant opening the mouth again. It meant joining the circle. The child waited. The double watched. The spiral pulsed. Harper closed her eyes and spoke. I remember you. The world collapsed. Not in violence. Not in noise. But in silence. As if the sound itself had been turned off. And when she opened her eyes, she wasn't in her apartment anymore. She stood in a circle of chairs. All 8 were filled now. Every version of herself sat with hands joined. The spiral burned beneath them. Above, no sky. Just a vast, open mouth with teeth that stretched to the edges of forever. It whispered, "Welcome home." The mouth didn't speak in language. It didn't need to. Its voice poured down like smoke from the endless ceiling above the circle of chairs, curling around Harper's skin, seeping into her lungs, her thoughts, her blood. It spoke in memory, in sensation. Every breath it took became a ripple through time itself, pulling her inward, back through years she didn't live, lives she didn't remember, faces she had never worn, but somehow still knew. She couldn't feel her body, or rather, she felt all of them, each Harper at once. The child, the teen, the broken woman, the stitched double, all linked now, each strand in a thread spun by something far beneath logic, far older than the house, than the fire, than her own bloodline. The spiral wasn't a symbol, it was a map, a fingerprint. A mouth that never stopped opening, never closed, never forgot the taste of her name. The mouth watched her. It waited, and for the first time, Harper understood why. She wasn't the only one it had touched. Not by far. She was just the only one to survive the full cycle. 8 chairs, 8 faces. 8 lives lived in fragments and echoes. Everyone else had been devoured halfway through, lost to madness, fire, disbelief. But she had remembered, and that made her different. That made her dangerous. The mouth knew. It showed her things now, visions, raw and burning, unfurling across her mind like film melting in reverse. She saw the first door, carved into stone, hidden deep beneath a monastery swallowed by time. A child opened it. Not her, not even someone human. Just a child in shape. The spiral had hissed its way into the world that day. She saw generations of sacrifices. Names chanted in a dead language. Mothers feeding their own. Fathers making deals in blood and bone. The mouth didn't hunt. It waited for the invitation. And when it came, it remembered every soul who let it in. Harper's family hadn't been cursed. They had been chosen, caretakers of the breach. watchers of the spiral, and she had been the first wind to disobey the rules, to survive the cycle without being consumed. The spiral beneath her glowed brighter now. The air crackled. Her other selves turned to her in unison, their hands tightening around hers, eyes burning with unspoken pleading. They were trapped, locked in this place where time circled itself. They needed her to finish it, to finally shut the mouth, but it wouldn't let her go without a price. A toll must be paid, a memory lost, or a life given. The mouth made its offer without words, only images. Choose. She could walk away, wake in her apartment, live a life that looked normal, but she'd forget the truth. Forget Sam, forget the spiral. The door would remain open, waiting, or she could stay, give herself over completely, and close it from within, seal it in silence. One last chair filled, one last song sung. Her mouth burned again, not from stitches this time, but from something older. Words formed on her tongue. The lullaby. It wanted her to sing it, to complete the ritual. The circle, the spiral. She stood. The other Harpers stood with her, their faces not quite their own anymore. She saw flashes, glimpses of other people beneath the skin. Not just herself. Other lives absorbed into the mouth. Other souls pressed into her reflection. Some screamed silently. Others stared in resignation. But one looked up and smiled. Sam. He stood just beyond the circle, whole untouched, holding the owl she thought had burned long ago. He nodded once, gently, and mouthed the words, "Don't let it sing for you." And that changed everything. The mouth thrived on invitation, on submission. But if she didn't sing, if she refused, she felt the spiral begin to constrict, tightening like a noose around her thoughts. The light pulsed red and black, faster now, like a heartbeat in panic. Her other selves fell to their knees, mouths open in silent agony. It didn't want choice. It wanted obedience. She gritted her teeth and stepped outside the spiral. The moment she crossed its edge, the mouth screamed. It wasn't a sound, it was a collapsing of reality, like glass shattering inside her skull. The chairs burst into flame. The versions of her twisted, disintegrated, howled without voice. The ground shook. The sky split wide. 1,000 eyes opened in the dark above and watched her bleed. And then the mouth moved. It descended, not as a thing, not as a creature, but as hunger itself. It wrapped around her, limbs made of time and memory. Mouths inside mouths whispering her name, offering her peace, love, warmth, silence, rest, anything. But Harper did not sing. She opened her mouth and spoke a single word, "No." And the mouth faltered. Just for a moment. But in that moment, the spiral beneath her cracked. The song broke, and the circle collapsed. She fell again. Hard, the world spun, colors reversed. Up became sideways. Pain returned, feeling returned. And then, light, real light, cold. She opened her eyes to find herself lying on pavement. Concrete against her back. Rain falling on her face. People standing over her. Real people, not shapes, not shadows. A siren in the distance. Streetlights flickering. She gasped and coughed. Her mouth was whole. Her tongue moved freely. She screamed. A nurse leaned over her, panic on her face. "She's awake. My God, she's alive." Harper didn't understand. She tried to sit up, tried to speak. But all she could do was stare past the nurse, across the street, where the lot should have been empty, where the house had never been. There it stood again, 113 Harrowick Lane, porch light glowing, curtains drawn, mailbox flag up, and in the window, a little girl smiled and began to hum. It took 3 full days before they released Harper from the hospital, and even then, it was with hesitation. The attending physician couldn't explain how she had survived without water, food, or shelter for what records said was nearly a week. No bruises, no signs of exposure, nothing but a mild fever and a long, deep scratch spiraling down the length of her spine. She didn't bother trying to explain. No one would have believed her anyway. Not the police. Not the nurses. Not the blank-faced psychiatrist who kept circling back to the word delusion like it would eventually make her nod. Harper didn't nod. She said very little, but inside she was screaming. Every time she blinked, she saw the spiral pulsing behind her eyelids. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the lullaby, and every time she turned a corner too fast or caught a reflection in glass, she saw herself watching, waiting, stitched, smiling. Her apartment no longer felt like hers. The light never seemed quite right, always a bit too warm or too cold, casting shadows that moved a second too late. Her clock ticked unevenly. She threw it out and found it on her nightstand the next morning, ticking normally again, until she touched it. Then the hands spun wildly, faster than time, and stopped at midnight. Always midnight. Sleep became impossible. Dreams were worse than the waking world. In them, the mouth sang in voices made of her own screams. Her other selves danced in circles, bleeding from the eyes, their mouths filled with ash. Sam walked beside her in silence, always out of reach, always watching. But what kept her awake the most was the house, because it was back, solid, real, standing exactly where it had never stood in official records. 113 Harrowick Lane. The lot wasn't empty anymore, and neither was she. There was something in her now, a presence, coiled like a snake in her chest. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it remembered things she didn't. Entire hours would vanish. She'd come to and realize she had moved rooms without thinking, left the stove on, scratched spirals into the walls with her fingernails. It knew her name, and she was starting to forget her own. The letters began again on the fourth night. No stamp, no return address. Just her name, always handwritten in a shaky scrawl. She didn't open the first two, but on the third night, one of them opened itself. Inside was a single Polaroid, the house at night, porch light glowing, front door wide open, and in the doorway Sam, bleeding, smiling, holding the awl. The message on the back: if you don't come, we'll bring you back anyway. She tried to leave town the next morning. Got as far as the edge of the highway before the car sputtered, choked, and died. Her phone lost all signal. The map spun endlessly. She turned the ignition until smoke rose from the dashboard. Walked to the nearest gas station, only to find it boarded up and abandoned, despite the faint sound of static playing behind the locked doors. There was no way out. Harper sat on the shoulder of the road until sundown, and then she started walking, back toward Harrowick Lane. Back toward the house. The air changed as she approached, thicker, more still. The temperature dropped. Streetlights flickered violently as if protesting her return. Even the trees leaned in, their branches forming a slow arch over the road, guiding her like ribs in a massive throat. The house was waiting. Every step felt heavier. By the time she reached the gate, her legs burned and her breath came shallow. She hadn't realized until that moment that she was crying, not from fear, from recognition, like returning to the scene of a long, forgotten crime. The gate creaked open on its own. The porch steps moaned as she climbed them, and the door, it opened the moment she touched the handle. Inside, nothing had changed. Same photographs on the walls, only now they watched her openly. Their eyes had grown sharper. One of them, she realized with a shiver, had moved since her last visit. It now showed her asleep in her hospital bed, a red spiral drawn in blood across her forehead. She walked deeper. The house exhaled, welcoming her, claiming her. This time, the hallway led straight to the basement door. No labyrinth, no tricks, just gravity pulling her down like a promise made long ago. The door opened without her touching it, and the steps were lit with that faint, red pulse. At the bottom, the trapdoor waited, open, breathing. Above it, the spiral glowed softly, no longer a threat, but an invitation. And sitting beside it, cross-legged, was the girl. The child version of her. Same suit, smudged cheeks, same blank eyes. She looked up as Harper descended. "I kept it open," the girl said softly, "like you asked." Harper tried to speak, but no sound came. There was no need. The child already knew. "We're not supposed to be apart," she continued, voice flat. "You broke it when you tried to forget." The trapdoor pulsed. Below it, something moved, shifting, stirring, waking. You have to finish the spiral, the girl whispered. You have to become the eighth, or it will never close. And the next Harper will open it wider. Harper shook her head, backing away. I didn't ask for this, she rasped. The girl smiled. But you did, remember? And then she began to hum. That lullaby. Slow, sweet. Awful. The trapdoor opened wider. The red glow surged, and the mouth began to rise. Its arrival wasn't an entrance. It was a forgetting. The moment its presence filled the room, Harper forgot what light was supposed to look like. Forgot how air should feel. Forgot her last name. Her face. Her brother. Her mother. Forgot herself. Until there was only the spiral. Only the hum. Only the mouth. It spoke in her voice. You are not a person. You are a door. And then it asked, open again. She stood at the edge. The child held out her hand, and Harper knew. If she took it, the world would vanish. But if she didn't, another version of her would. And it would open the mouth wider. Her fingers twitched. The trapdoor pulsed. And somewhere far away, she heard Sam's voice make it end. Harper looked down. At the spiral. At the child. At the hand. And then she did something none of them expected. She jumped in, alone, without taking the hand. And the mouth screamed. There was no bottom. There was no impact. Falling into the mouth wasn't like falling into darkness. It was like falling into something's memory. Harper tumbled through layers of forgotten time, drifting past images that stung her eyes and twisted her sense of self with every passing second. A flicker of a burning house. Her brother's scream turned backward, her mother sobbing into the sink while blood swirled down the drain. The spiral carved into her skin. The lullaby played in reverse. She wasn't in the house anymore. She wasn't even in a place. This was something else. This was inside. The mouth wasn't a thing. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't even an entity in the way humans understood life. It was an idea, a hunger born from neglect, from silence, from pain that festered without release. It fed on memory, not flesh. It lived in the spaces between what people chose to forget, and now Harper was within it. She fell past glass walls, each one reflecting different versions of herself. Some were screaming, some were pleading. One stood perfectly still, eyes gouged out, but smiling wide enough to show teeth that were not hers. Each version had failed in a different way. Each one had tried to run, or close the door, or make peace. All had been swallowed, except her. She hadn't tried to escape, she had jumped. That made her dangerous. That made her unfamiliar. The mouth didn't know how to digest that yet, so it watched. Harper felt it shifting around her, reshaping the space into something she could understand. The fall slowed, the light solidified, and she landed, not on the floor, but in a memory. Her childhood bedroom. Almost. The walls were too clean, too straight. Her drawings were where she remembered, but the faces on them had been erased. Her stuffed animals lined the shelves, but their eyes had been replaced with tiny spirals. Outside the window, no stars, no moon, just a thick red glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. And on the bed, herself, age 5, sleeping peacefully, mouth slightly open. A soft humming came from somewhere in the room. That lullaby. Again. Harper turned slowly. In the corner, her mother stood in the dark, unmoving, eyes wide, blank. Her mouth split open, far too wide, as if unhinged, revealing a second mouth inside it. And from that mouth, the song flowed, low and endless. Harper backed up. This isn't real, she whispered, but the room responded like it had heard her. Her sleeping self stirred. Eyes fluttered open. Not the eyes of a child, the eyes of the spiral. Endless, red patient. You shouldn't have come here, the child said in a voice that was older than the sky. Harper gritted her teeth. I came to end it. The child smiled. You can't end a story you started. You're not a visitor, you're the ink. Then the room peeled away, like wallpaper coming off in sheets. The entire world sloughed off its shape and left her standing on a narrow platform suspended in nothing. Below her, infinite Harpers knelt in spirals, humming. Above her, an open eye that blinked once every 10 seconds, and with each blink, a memory disappeared. First her brother's face, then her mother's voice, then the sound of her own name. Harper gripped her head and screamed. "Stop!" The mouth did not obey. It didn't hear commands. It only heard invitation, and her scream had opened another crack, a fissure in her resolve. From it, the mouth birthed a new shape. Sam. Not her brother, a shell, an echo. He approached her across the thin platform with slow, dragging steps. His face was intact but wrong, too calm. His hands were tied with red thread, trailing behind him in long, wet strands that left no shadow. "You gave me to it," he said softly, voice gentle. "I was a child," Harper said through gritted teeth. "You still are." The platform beneath her feet trembled. It was growing thinner. "You want to fix this?" Sam asked. She nodded. "Then you have to do something no one else has ever done in here." "What?" Harper asked. "Remember," her heart lurched. The mouth didn't fear force. It didn't fear rituals, knives, fires, incantations. It feared clarity, truth. The only thing that could close the spiral was understanding how it began. She closed her eyes. And she remembered. Not just the night of the fire. Not just the trapdoor, but the days leading to it. She remembered overhearing her mother arguing with a man she never saw again. She remembered being told not to go into the basement, but finding a letter under her pillow, written in her own handwriting, telling her to open the door. She remembered writing it. She remembered sitting at the top of the stairs, humming, waiting for the voice to start. And when it did, she answered. Because it told her it could fix things. It told her her brother didn't have to leave. It told her her mother would stop crying. It told her she would never be alone again. And she had believed it. She opened the trapdoor, and it opened her. Tears streamed down her face. I remember. The platform cracked, but this time it wasn't collapse, it was release. A light burst from the space beneath her feet, rising upward like a reverse waterfall. The eye above shrieked. The spiral began to unwind, unraveling itself like thread pulled from a wound. Sam smiled, and vanished, not into the mouth, into light. The humming stopped. The voices fell silent. The mouth closed, and Harper stood alone, truly alone. In the dark then, a door appeared, wooden, small, carved with a spiral that no longer pulsed. It simply waited. She walked to it, opened it, and stepped through, into morning light. Real morning, street sounds, birdsong, wind, no house behind her. No spiral beneath her, only earth, dirt, silence. The lot on Harrowick Lane was empty again, and this time, something in her chest told her it would stay that way. She turned away, ready to walk. But across the street, taped to a streetlight, was a photograph, a Polaroid. She plucked it free. Her, standing at the trapdoor. But this time, her back was turned. And on the photo, written in sharp red ink, you remembered. But someone else is humming now. Harper stood frozen in the middle of Harrowick Lane. The photo trembling slightly in her hands, though the wind had gone still. Her reflection in the glossed paper smiled back at her. Back turned to the trapdoor, unaware, unafraid. But it wasn't the image that held her breath hostage. It was the words scribbled beneath it. Someone else is humming now. Not her. Not anymore. But someone. The house was gone. She had seen it collapse inward, swallowed by the mouth as it sealed behind her in that impossible space beyond time and memory. The spiral had unwound. The eye had closed. The platform had cracked and dissolved into light. It was over. So why did the air still feel watchful? She pocketed the photo, turned, and walked away from the lot. Not toward her apartment. She couldn't bring herself to go back there yet. It still smelled like ash and lavender, like something had spent the night pressed up against the other side of the walls, breathing in sync with her while she slept. Instead, she drifted through the streets in silence. The city was awake. People were walking dogs, checking their phones, jogging to nowhere. Nothing seemed wrong to them. No one else felt the buzz beneath the ground, the whisper just under the noise. But Harper did. She could feel it. Something still open. The mouth was closed. She was sure of that. But the song hadn't stopped. It had simply found a new voice. She needed answers. Real ones. So she went back to the place she hadn't stepped foot in since the fire. Her childhood home. It had long since been sold, gutted, renovated. But she knew some part of it was still the same. Evil didn't die when you painted over it. It waited. The new owners weren't home. She didn't knock. She walked through the backyard, found the old bulkhead leading to the storm cellar, and pried it open with a rusted pipe. The basement was smaller than she remembered, but the smell was still there. Not rot, not mold. Memory. The spiral wasn't on the floor anymore. But the imprint of it remained, not visible, but felt, like a bruise under the floorboards that would never quite fade. She knelt, placed her palm on the cool concrete, and saw her, not herself, the new one, the next, a girl, no older than 8, sitting on the edge of her own bed, feet swinging just above the carpet, blonde curls, pale skin, humming, the same lullaby, sleep. Little Crow, her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but the rhythm was perfect. Harper reeled back from the vision. The connection snapped, like a thread pulled too tight. She's close. That's what the spiral had shown her. The mouth wasn't coming back. It didn't have to, because the song had survived, and someone had taught it. Harper's throat tightened, the letters, the Polaroids, the subtle gaps in time she couldn't explain. She'd been leaving them, not her, not consciously, but some slivered part of her that hadn't come back alone. She wasn't entirely Harper anymore. Not completely. Something had followed her through the door, clung to her like breath to glass, and it had used her. To find the next. To teach the next. The memory of the child's humming echoed like a soft scream in her chest. She ran. Back up the stairs. Through the yard. Onto the sidewalk. The sun was setting now, but she hadn't been in the basement that long. Time moved wrong around these places. It flexed. Folded. Crouched like a beast waiting to pounce. She pulled out her phone and checked recent calls, messages, photos. There, 2 nights ago. A video she didn't remember recording. She tapped it. The screen flickered. Then she saw herself, sitting in a park, next to a little girl. The same one from the vision. Harper leaned in close, whispered something. The girl giggled, then began to hum. Harper's own voice followed, low and careful, singing the lullaby in perfect harmony. She dropped the phone. It clattered to the pavement. She bent, staring at the cracked screen, watching the loop replay over and over. You taught her, not the spiral, not the mouth, you. Whatever had followed her through the trapdoor hadn't needed the house anymore. It had her. She had become the carrier. A vector for the song. And the girl was listening now. Learning. Becoming. A door, just like Harper had been. She sat on the curb, head in her hands, breath shaking. Please, she whispered to no one. Please let me undo this. But there was no answer. Only the faint sound of humming. Somewhere nearby, a child's voice. So soft, so close. It drifted from the alley behind her, half buried beneath the hum of traffic, the chirp of a distant crosswalk signal. Sleep. Little Crow. Harper stood heart pounding and stepped into the alley. Empty. Dark. But the sound remained. She followed it, every step pressing her deeper into something familiar and terrible. The hum faded, replaced by whispering. Dozens of voices. Layered. Overlapping. All of them hers. You brought it back. You carried it through. You never really closed it. You only changed its shape. You opened the first door. Now she will open the last. Then silence. She spun. The alley was empty. The light at the end had gone out. Just darkness now. And in it, a single photo pinned to the brick wall. She pulled it free. Another Polaroid. The girl again, but older now. No more curls. Eyes half-lidded, mouth slightly open, as she whispered something into another child's ear. On the back of the photo, it only takes one voice to start the choir. Harper crumpled it in her fist. She had made a choice once. She could make another now. The mouth wasn't singing. She was. And it was time to go quiet. Harper didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Sleep belonged to children and the trusting, not to someone who had walked through the mouth and come back with its echo lodged in her ribs. The lullaby rang behind her eyes like a dull migraine, soft but ceaseless, as though her mind was trying to hum even when her lips stayed still. She could feel it, like a pressure in her chest, not just a memory, but a presence. The song wasn't stuck inside her. It was alive inside her. And worse, it was growing. She lay still for hours, watching the ceiling as the shadows changed shape. Sometimes they were just shadows. Other times, they seemed to stretch into spirals, long fingers curling at the edges. She didn't trust them. She didn't trust the walls, the furniture, the mirrors, especially the mirrors. At 3:13 a.m., her voice betrayed her. She woke mid-hum, the lullaby spilling out from her lips in that slow, haunting rhythm before her brain could even register the sound. She clamped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide in the dark. Her heart thundered. That had never happened before. Not since the mouth had closed. Not until now. She bolted upright, flipped on every light in the apartment. Her reflection in the hallway mirror blinked half a second late. When she turned, it smiled. That was enough. She packed a bag without thinking. Just clothes, old notebooks, her tape recorder, and the photos. The Polaroids she kept swearing she'd burn, but never could. She shoved it all in and left without locking the door. Let it have the place. Let it crumble behind her. Let it be eaten. This wasn't about safety anymore. This was about silence. True silence. The kind that comes before birth. The kind that follows behind real endings. The kind the mouth couldn't reach. The kind it feared. She needed to find it. The first silence. The oldest one. There was only one place she could even begin to look. Sam's journal. She had barely read it the first time. The fire had gutted most of his room, but her mother had salvaged a few damaged notebooks and stuffed them into a sealed bin. Harper hadn't touched them in decades. Not since the day she caught her mother whispering to one of them, fingers tracing a spiral burned into the cover. She drove north, toward the outskirts of town, past the farmland that had long since turned to dust, past the half-burned sign marking the town limits. Her mother's old storage unit waited like a forgotten tomb, its lock brittle, untouched. She cracked it open. Inside, everything was the same, as though time had hesitated here. Plastic bins stacked neatly, furniture wrapped in gray, brittle cloth. The air smelled of mildew and something else, lavender and scorched metal. She found the bin in the far corner, pulled off the lid. There they were, notebooks, black, soaked on the bottom edges, and beneath them, tape cassettes, labeled in Sam's handwriting. Mom, basement, night 3. Voice in the wall. Door again. Don't forget. She sat on the cold cement floor, heart hammering, and pushed the first tape into the recorder. Static. Then Sam's voice, soft, hurried, it came again. Last night. Same voice, same words. I think it's Harper. I think it's her, but it's not her voice. It's older. It keeps humming. I tried to cover my ears, but it got inside anyway. Mom said it's just dreams, but I don't think she hears it like I do. I don't think she wants to. Harper's fingers tightened on the recorder. Another tape. Click. She was at the trapdoor, smiling again, just standing there, like she was waiting. I asked her why, and she said, "It's lonely down there." And then she laughed, but her mouth didn't move. Another. Click. If you find this, Harper, if you ever find this, you have to remember. It doesn't start with the song. It starts with the silence. That's what it hates. That's why it sings. That's why it makes us sing. To fill it. Don't let it. Don't fill it. Let it stay empty. It's the only way to starve it. Harper sat frozen. Her breath came slow, shallow. That's why it kept trying to get in, through the lullaby, through memory, through voice. because silence was the only thing it couldn't touch. She rewound the tape, let the words play again. Let it stay empty. She took the tape and notebook and drove without thinking, without checking the time, without food or pause, until she found herself back at the one place she had promised herself never to return: the ruins of the old heroic church. It hadn't been mentioned in Sam's journal. Not directly, but she remembered the name. He had whispered it once in a fever dream before he vanished. He had said the mouth came from a place like a well, a place where people prayed into the dark. And Harper had always wondered about the church. It had burned before she was born, but locals never spoke of it, not even in passing. A name erased, a structure avoided. She'd driven past the overgrown road that led to it 100 times. This time she turned and followed it. The path was long, overrun with weeds and silence. Even the birds avoided it. Her headlights illuminated nothing but trees and broken stone until, finally, the shape emerged, the skeletal remains of a church, blackened and brittle. She stepped out of the car, the air thick as syrup, the spiral weighted beneath her feet. Carved into the soil, she entered. Inside, the pews were half collapsed. Ash coated the floor like dust. In the center, where the altar should have stood, was a hole. A well. She stepped toward it. No trapdoor this time. No tricks. Just a still blackness so dense it looked solid. She dropped a rock in. No sound. Not even the absence of sound. It swallowed everything. She understood then. This was the place Sam had been talking about. This was where the first door had been heard. This was where the mouth had listened before it learned to sing. And it was still hungry. She reached into her bag, pulled out the recorder, and hit play. Let it stay empty. She pressed stop and sat down beside the well. She didn't hum. She didn't speak. She didn't think. She simply listened. And she waited for the silence to come, for the mouth to know she would not sing again. The silence didn't come gently. It wasn't peace or calm or stillness. It wasn't quiet birdsong in the morning or snowfall or the hush before sleep. It was brutal, aggressive, like a pressure drop inside her skull, like a vacuum collapsing in slow motion. Harper sat by the well at the center of the ruined church, listening not to the world, but to its absence. The mouth had always seduced with its lullaby, a sweet tune to cover the rot underneath. But this silence had teeth. This silence bit back. Her body shivered, even as sweat formed along her spine. Every instinct screamed to make a sound, any sound. A breath too loud, a foot shuffle, a whisper, something to fill the air. But she didn't. She gritted her jaw and stayed still, the weight of that silence pressing in tighter with every minute. And then it noticed her. She felt it, not heard it, when the mouth turned its attention toward her again. Not from the well, not from the house or her dreams. From everywhere. Like the air itself remembered her defiance and was preparing to correct it. The first sign was the hair on her arms rising, even though the church ruins were still and cold. Then the birds, what few there had been, abandoned the trees. Leaves stopped rustling. Her breath steamed visibly now, though the air hadn't changed temperature. The silence was no longer empty. It was watching. The well remained pitch black. No sound from its depths. No wind. Just a void so perfect it looked like a hole torn into reality. Harper leaned closer, trying not to breathe too loudly, every muscle trembling from the effort of restraint. A hum threatened her throat, tight and familiar. Her body wanted to sing, like a muscle that had been worked too long and forgot how to do anything else. But she swallowed it down, grinding her teeth together until her jaw ached. The mouth didn't just hunger for flesh. It fed on participation. It needed to do it. Without a second voice, it starved. That's why it had turned her into a carrier, why it needed her to pass the song along. That was its game. A viral melody carried generation to generation. No more houses, no more haunted wells, just music, just memory, just inheritance. But silence, true. Enduring silence, was its starvation. She pressed the tape recorder's microphone down into the soil beside the well and hit record. Nothing but static and faint wind. She sat back, still silent, watching the red light blink. Then, faintly, something flickered at the edge of the trees. Movement. A silhouette. She didn't flinch, didn't call out, didn't even blink. It came closer. A girl. The same one from the vision. Blonde hair. Pale skin. That strange, too familiar expression, like she already knew everything Harper had ever thought and was simply waiting for her to remember. The girl stepped into the clearing, head tilted, humming softly, just loud enough to break the stillness, just loud enough for the mouth to hear. Harper didn't move. She clenched her fists, forcing herself not to react, though the urge to scream was overwhelming. The girl walked to the edge of the well and peered down, humming louder now, the notes rising and falling with that ancient, crooked rhythm. Then she turned, stared directly at Harper, and stopped humming. The silence came roaring back like a storm. The wind surged, the trees groaned. A high-pitched wail, not from the girl, not from the forest, but from inside the well, screeched upward like something scraping against the walls of creation. The girl blinked. Then she smiled. "It's louder in the quiet, isn't it?" she said. Her voice didn't belong to a child. It was deeper. Ancient, cold. Harper said nothing. The girl stepped closer, crouched in front of her, and reached out. Touched the tape recorder gently with 2 fingers. "You brought it here," she whispered. The silence. "But you didn't make it. You think if you say nothing, if you hold your breath long enough, the song will end. But songs don't die in silence. They die in remembrance." Harper's mouth tightened, but still she didn't speak. "You have to name it," the girl whispered. "Say what it is. Say what you are. That's what shuts the spiral. Not quiet, not defiance. Truth." The girl leaned in close, her breath cold against Harper's ear. "Say your name." The mouth pulsed beneath them. The ground trembled. From within the well came a thud, then another, like something massive pacing circles in a space it could barely fit inside. It was listening. Harper shook her head, slowly, deliberately. She wouldn't sing. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't name it. The girl's smile twitched. For the first time, her eyes flickered with something like doubt. A crack in the mask. She stood, face hardening. "If you don't name yourself, it will," she said, voice flat, "and it will name you wrong." Then the girl opened her mouth, and the lullaby poured out. Only this time it wasn't soft. It was rotten. A twisted, stretched version of the tune, too fast in some places, dragging in others, layered with whispers that weren't words, but meanings Harper could feel. Each note was a demand, each breath a threat. The mouth was trying to force her to join again, to answer the song with the harmony it remembered from her childhood. The spiral was trying to spin her back into place. Harper stood. Slowly, deliberately, she picked up the recorder and pressed stop. Then she looked the girl in the eye and whispered, not the song, not a scream, not the old truths, just one word, her name. Not what the mouth called her, not what the spiral wrote on walls, her real name, Harper Ellen Wynne. And the ground split, not into a hole, but into light, brilliant, searing, silent light. The mouth howled, the girl screamed, the well collapsed inward, and the spiral, carved in soil, in her skin, in her memory, unraveled. For the first time in her life, Harper felt still. No noise, no pressure, no presence behind her eyes. Just her, only her. The mouth was gone. The song had no echo. The silence was hers. She turned and walked away. No humming followed. No photo waited. Just dirt and sun, and the sound of her own footsteps, alive in the quiet. For 3 days, Harper heard nothing but her own breath. It was strange at first, like waking from years of anesthesia. She'd never realized how deeply the hum had embedded itself into her. It hadn't just followed her. It had shaped her, creeping into the pause between thoughts, into the silence between heartbeats. Now, with it gone, but the world felt hollow, but not in the terrible way it once had. This emptiness was hers, not the mouth's. not the house's, hers. And yet, peace never comes without a price. On the fourth morning, she woke to the scent of something sharp. Not sulfur, not smoke. Blood. It coated the air of her tiny apartment, subtle but distinct, like a warning whispered into her nose. She followed it, checking every corner of the room until her foot brushed against something soft on the floor. A dead bird, its wings tucked neatly under it, its eyes missing. She hadn't opened a window in weeks. Harper backed away slowly and glanced at the wall above her desk. A small, precise spiral had been drawn in what looked like ink, but the smell made it clear. Blood, her own. She didn't know. She didn't feel wounded. Her skin was intact. No open cuts, no new bruises, no signs of intrusion, but something inside her ached. A deep bone, deep throb, like a bruise pressed from the inside, like a scar remembering itself. She burned the bird without hesitation, lit a match, dropped it into the trash can, and watched until the body crumbled to ash. The spiral, though, she didn't touch it. She couldn't. Every time she raised her hand, her fingertips trembled. Something had closed, but something else had woken. She thought about the girl. The one who sang, the one who smiled with a stranger's voice. She hadn't seen her since the night at the church, not in the flesh, but she showed up in Harper's dreams, not nightmares, worse, in between places. Dreams where Harper was neither sleeping nor conscious, just floating, half aware, stuck in some gray corridor of memory. And always, the girl would be standing at the end of it, her mouth shut, her eyes unblinking. Her dress swaying to a tune that didn't exist anymore. But Harper knew she was still listening, still waiting. The spiral might have unraveled, but the echo remained. It had followed her back, not in the world, in her. That night, Harper stripped to the waist and stood before the bathroom mirror. There, beneath her skin, just below the clavicle on the left side, a faint mark had started to form. At first she thought it was a bruise, but it didn't ache, it itched. It shifted. A spiral, faint, not drawn, not carved, growing. She reached out and touched the glass. Her reflection did the same, but a beat behind. Not simultaneous, not quite right. She stepped back. No, she whispered. You don't get to come with me. The reflection's mouth moved, but she made no sound, just shaped one word. Always. The lights flickered. The bulb above the mirror popped, showering her in tiny shards. She flinched but didn't bleed. Not this time. The spiral didn't glow. It didn't hum. It just waited. She understood now. The mouth hadn't been destroyed. It had been rewired. She hadn't killed it. She had absorbed it. She was the container now. The memory, the melody, the silence. The mouth had changed shape. No longer a house. No longer a well. No longer a song. Just her. She had starved it of voices. Refused to hum. Refused to pass it on. And in doing so, she'd trapped it inside her. But something that old doesn't vanish. It waits. She paced the apartment, thinking, running through everything Sam had written. Every line in his journal, every recording, every dream. Let it stay empty. Say your name. Don't let it sing for you. But no one had ever said what happens when you become the silence. What happens when the mouth isn't beneath the floorboards or stitched into wallpaper, but beating beneath your skin? Could she contain it? Or was she just a slow spiral, turning toward the inevitable? At 3:33 a.m., again that damned hour, she woke with the spiral on her chest burning. Not literally, not with heat, but with pressure. Like it wanted to move, like it wanted out. She ran cold water over it. Nothing. She pressed ice to it. Nothing. She screamed into the sink, fists clenched against the porcelain. Still, nothing. But in the mirror above her, just for a flash, she saw her own face smiling at her. Not the stitched version, not the child. Her, smiling. With that same slow, creeping expression the mouth had always worn. That's when the fear returned. The kind that rots beneath the skin. The kind she'd buried beneath bravery and false victories. She hadn't beaten it. She'd changed it. And maybe that was worse. Because now, No one would believe her. No haunted house, no trapdoor, no cursed song on tape. Just a woman with a scared past and a spiraling mind. Exactly what the mouth wanted. To hide inside a body no one would question. A woman already broken. Already doubted. Already known for screaming about impossible things. And the world would go on. Until one night, maybe years from now, she'd open her mouth in her sleep. And hum. And someone else would hear. And the song would live again. No longer an echo of what was, but a beginning of what would be. Unless she found the ending first. Unless she dug it out of herself. By force if she had to. Unless she could silence herself completely. For good. She looked down at the spiral. Whispered, if you're going to live in me, you're going to starve. But in her mind, a reply came. Soft. Patient, we have time. Harper stopped sleeping. Not by choice. Not even through fear. Sleep simply refused her now. Whenever she tried. Whenever her body began to tip into that soft between place where the world dissolved and memory took over. Something inside her flinched awake. Not her brain, not her instincts. The spiral, it tightened, twitched, reminded her gently at first. Then with sharp bursts of nausea and a vibrating pressure behind her eyes that made her see double. It wouldn't let her sleep because that was when it stirred. Not in dreams. In her mouth, she'd found herself humming again. Quiet, unthinking hums. In the shower. In the kitchen. While scrolling her phone, blank-eyed, trying to ground herself in something unspiritual. The melody would creep up her throat like bile, that damn lullaby uncoiling syllable by syllable. And when she realized it, really heard it, it would stop dead. And for just a moment after the last note, something would listen. Not outside. Inside, she had become the mouth's last meal, and its final hope. Because without her, the spiral was cut off, the chain broken. She'd starved it. Buried it, denied it the choir it craved, but it had adapted, evolved. The mouth no longer needed architecture or bloodlines. It only needed a host. And Harper Wynn had opened the door from both sides. The hunger inside her wasn't a demon. It wasn't evil in the religious sense. It didn't demand sin or sacrifice. What it craved was simpler. Sound. Connection. The feeding loop that came from one voice triggering another. Like a virus in chorus form, she was both the infection and the cure. But only for as long as she resisted. And resistance, she was learning, had limits. The spiral beneath her skin had grown. She didn't need a mirror anymore to see it. It surfaced in her dreams, even in her thoughts. Each time clearer, cleaner, sharper. Like it was purifying itself inside her. Like it was becoming. And one morning, without reason, she began bleeding from her ears, thin streams. Not enough to alarm the emergency room, but enough to rattle her. The doctors found nothing wrong. Nothing ruptured. No trauma. But the nurse's voice. That nurse with the tired smile and the cracked glasses kept circling back in Harper's head. Sometimes the body just needs to release pressure. That night, Harper pressed a knife against her collarbone, right where the spiral was darkest. She didn't cut. Not yet, but she considered it. What if the silence wasn't working? What if starving it only made it more desperate, more inventive? What if silence was just its way of molting? Changing shape, preparing to burst out in a new form she couldn't control. And worst of all, what if it had already started? What if she was already passing it on? That idea haunted her more than anything else. She'd been careful. No conversations longer than needed. No lullabies. No recordings. No humming within earshot of anyone. But she had walked past people, brushed shoulders in coffee shops, handed over cash, coughed in elevators. All it would take was a single word spoken with the spiral's cadence, and someone would carry it next. Maybe it didn't need her to sing anymore. Maybe it just needed her to exist. That's when the hallucinations began. She saw faces where there were none. In steam. In rust. In peeling wallpaper. Spirals drawn into condensation that vanished before she could show anyone. Voices mumbling lullabies from vents or radiators, or the mouths of sleeping strangers on park benches. And once, just once, she caught her reflection mouthing the song while she stood perfectly still. The reflection wasn't smiling, it was crying, silently, like it knew what she didn't, like it pitied her. The spiral, she realized, wasn't just trying to control her. It was trying to understand her, to learn what made her break. Because that was the key. It wasn't just hunger. It was study. The mouth had always waited, watched, listened, but now it learned, and it was using her as the test subject. The silence wasn't hurting it, it was teaching it. And when it learned enough, when it knew what made humans shatter, how they grieved, how they reached for sound in the dark, it would sing again, louder than before, and Harper wouldn't be needed. Not as a vessel, not even as a voice, just as the first note in a new song. And then it happened. 3 nights into her spiral, sleepless spiral, burning spiral, bleeding fugue, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. No caller ID, just a spiral symbol. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because a voicemail followed. She played it, and her own voice whispered back, "We have time. You were never meant to silence me. You were meant to amplify. It wasn't a trapdoor, it was a stage. And now a pause. A breath. And now someone else is singing." Harper dropped the phone. It didn't break. It just kept playing. The sound of footsteps, of children humming, a playground chant. The spiral had changed again, and it had found a new mask. Innocence. The one thing people never suspect. The one thing no one believes can carry ruin. And the children had heard her. Somewhere. Somehow. A note in her sleep. A sound left behind. A whisper. She ran. To the park. To the school. To the neighborhoods she hadn't set foot in since the mouth first marked her. And she saw them. 3 children. Sitting in a circle. Singing. But not the lullaby. No, this time it was something new. Something she had never taught. And when they looked up at her, all 3 had spirals drawn over their lips, in red crayon, and they smiled, not cruelly, but welcoming, like they recognized her, like she was late to something she'd promised to attend. And they sang louder, and louder, and Harper fell to her knees, because she finally understood she hadn't silenced it. She'd only given it rhythm. The children's voices weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. The sound they made was small and strange, like wind chimes in an empty church, high and lilting, pitched somewhere between innocence and ritual. Harper crouched in the grass, frozen, her hands trembling at her sides as their humming crawled over her like a net woven from needles. Each note landed with the weight of memory, of recognition, not hers. The mouths, the spiral inside her pulsed in sync with their song. It didn't hurt. It ached. Like a limb waking from long dessous, a numbness thawing too quickly, revealing just how deep the nerves still ran. Harper bit her lip to keep from joining in. She could feel it rising in her throat, that now familiar pressure, the hunger to echo. The spiral was no longer passive. It was active, calling out, threading itself between her ribs, waiting for her to let go just enough to open her mouth and complete the melody. The children stood, 3 of them. A boy with crooked teeth, a girl with braids, and another girl, the same one from the well, the one with the curls, the one who had first hummed to the mouth and brought the lullaby back into the world. She stepped forward. No blood, no eyes glazed with possession. Just a child. At least, that's what Harper tried to tell herself. But something inside her knew better. The girl smiled. "You gave it rhythm," she said softly. Harper didn't answer. She couldn't. The spiral throbbed once beneath her skin, and the urge to hum nearly bent her in half. The boy giggled. "You're the first song." "And we're the rest," the braided girl added. They spoke in unison now, like rehearsed lines, like a prayer. Harper stumbled to her feet, backing away, her breath shallow. She wanted to scream, to shout no, to tell them to stop. But the air in her lungs wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the echo. "You're not real," she whispered. "You're just a projection." An infection. This isn't you. But they didn't flinch. They kept humming, and the world responded. A breeze picked up, sharp and metallic, carrying the scent of rain, rot, and something sweet. The sky darkened too fast. The birds in the trees went silent. The branches bent inward. Then the playground began to shift, not move, change. The slide twisted, forming a perfect loop. The swings spun until they aligned in the shape of a spiral. The sand beneath her feet grew dark, damp like the soil near the old church well. The mouth was watching, listening. Harper's knees buckled. She fell to the ground, clutching her stomach. The spiral beneath her skin burned now, not metaphorically, not emotionally. A real heat pulsed from it, radiating out through her chest like a second heart trying to beat in its own rhythm. But this wasn't possession. This wasn't control. It was permission. Her body was no longer being overtaken. It was being invited, and she was starting to say yes. That terrified her more than anything. The 3 children walked in a slow circle around her now. Their humming grew softer, slower, not the old lullaby, something else. It was building into something Harper couldn't name, an almost melody. Something formless and ancient pressing through the cracks of human understanding. They didn't need her voice. They needed her presence. She was the fulcrum, the tuning fork, the starting note. Every time they sang near her, the spiral aligned, and now it was reaching further, because the children weren't alone. Harper looked up, and behind the playground others stood, parents, teenagers, strangers, all of them quiet, watching, some with blood on their hands, some with eyes rolled back, some with spirals drawn or carved or burned into their clothes, skin, hair, all of them listening, all of them waiting for her to sing. She shook her head slowly. No. The spiral pulsed again. Yes, she screamed. Not a note, not the song, a scream. The only sound she still owned, and the watchers flinched. For a moment, the spiral inside her recoiled, uncertain. That scream had cut, broken something. But not enough. The girl with the curls stepped closer and leaned in. I used to be scared, she whispered. But the spiral taught me how to sing without fear. She reached out and placed her hand on Harper's chest, over the mark. And now you will teach them. Harper swatted the hand away and stumbled backward into the grass, and the spiral inside her screamed. Not through sound, through sensation. A burst of heat and agony tore across her ribs. She pulled up her shirt, and there it was. Not just a mark, movement. The spiral on her skin had grown from a faint bruise to a vivid, writhing symbol. It twisted slowly, impossibly, a living shape. It wasn't ink. It wasn't carved. It was alive, burrowing outward. Her body wasn't the container anymore. It was the choir. Her voice was the first note. But the song wouldn't stop with her. The mouth had learned something new. And now it was teaching others. Spreading itself through humming games and nursery rhymes and sleep talking and whispered lullabies sung to babies who would never remember the words but would always know the tune. She was too late. The silence hadn't killed it. It had refined it, made it stronger, quieter, undefinable. She crawled to the edge of the playground and collapsed, heart thundering. Overhead the clouds spun in slow spirals. Above her, the children returned to their song, no longer directed at her, just out, into the air, into the world. And from somewhere distant, somewhere far beyond the edge of her perception, Harper heard a familiar sound, another voice joining in. Not a child, not even nearby, just another echo, another body, another open mouth, and she finally understood. The spiral had no center, and now it had no edge. Harper didn't remember how she got home. The last clear moment was her body hitting the edge of the playground. The children's song curling around her like smoke, threading into the grass, rising like heat off asphalt. After that, it was all fragments. Cars passing too slowly, a bus stop that shouldn't have been there, a brief moment of staring into a window and seeing herself mouthing the words again. Not humming now, mouthing, silently. As if her body had memorized the shape of the song and was rehearsing it without her permission. She locked every door, shut every curtain, turned off every light. But it wasn't the world outside she feared anymore. It was herself. She sat on the floor in the dark, knees tucked to her chest, trying to recall the last full day she'd had without the spiral, without the mouth, without the hush of that lullaby slithering beneath her tongue. But there wasn't one. Not really. Not since she was 5. Maybe not even then. The truth pressed against her like a knife at her throat. This wasn't just trauma. This wasn't just memory. This was design. She had been chosen, not for some prophecy, not as a victim, but because the spiral had studied her, waited for someone like her, someone fractured, eager to be filled, someone whose silence made space for the song, and now it was finishing its crescendo. She could feel it. The pressure in her ears was back, the throb beneath her ribs, the strange tightness in her jaw, like her bones were humming just below hearing range. There was only one word in her mind now, over and over, almost. The mouth was close. Not here, not fully, not yet, but close. It didn't need a house anymore. It didn't need a basement, or a well, or a trapdoor. It didn't even need her voice. It just needed the moment. The final moment when she would forget what silence felt like. That would be the threshold. The final key. The last note. And then the mouth would become. Harper stood dizzy, sweating through her shirt. Her spine ached, like someone had been pressing their fingers into each vertebra, lining her up for something she couldn't see. She stumbled to the mirror. The spiral was fully formed now, no longer red, black, thick lines coiling beneath her skin like ink tattooed into her by something unhuman. She stared at herself. Hard. "You're not singing," she whispered. "You're not giving it what it wants." Her reflection blinked, delayed, then began to hum. Soft, sweet, mocking. Harper punched the glass. Cracks burst outward like a spider web, splitting the image of her spiral-covered chest into broken shards. The humming didn't stop, because it wasn't coming from the reflection anymore. It was coming from her. Somewhere in her throat, the song had already started again. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, begging, not to the mouth, to herself. "Don't give it to them," she whispered. "Don't let them carry it." But the spiral, it listened. It heard her resistance, and it laughed. Not in sound, in sensation, a ripple across her nerves, like someone striking a tuning fork inside her bones. And then, her phone lit up. Another voicemail. No number, no label. Just the spiral. She pressed play. Her own voice again. But this time not whispering. This time she was singing. Not the lullaby, something new. A melody that made her stomach turn and her breath catch in her throat. Words she didn't recognize but somehow understood. A song that didn't describe the mouth. It was the mouth, encoded in notes and breath and memory. And behind it, dozens of others joined in. Children, women, men, all humming, all following her lead. It had begun. She wasn't the only one anymore. She wasn't the container. She was the conductor. The choir was real, and it only needed one more. The final voice. The voice that ends the silence. Harper grabbed a pen, ripped open her notebook. There had to be something she could do. Somewhere in Sam's notes, he'd written about thresholds. About what happens when the spiral crosses out of memory and into physicality. When it becomes not just a melody but a movement. She flipped through every page she'd copied. Most of it was lost, scorched, smudged. But one line stood out now more than ever. If the mouth sings in full, it will never stop. It will become time. Sound will belong to it. And then, we will forget what came before the first note. Harper's hands trembled. That was the final cost. Not possession, not death. Forgetting. Humanity's collective memory erased and rewritten in song. No history, no stories, no silence, only humming. Forever, unless she stopped it. But how? How do you undo a song once it's out in the world? She stared at the broken mirror. The spiral on her chest moved again. Pulsed. Beckoned. She realized the answer then, not because it was brilliant, but because it was obvious. If the mouth had learned from her, then it could also be starved by her. The echo began with her. But so could the silence. She didn't need to kill it. She needed to swallow it whole. Let it have her. All of her. Not a fragment. Not a sliver. Not the piece that hummed. But the whole truth. The scar. The song, the scream. The silence. And she had to end it where it began. With her voice. And her name. She grabbed her tape recorder. The same one Sam used. Sat in the center of her living room. Pressed record. And said, "My name is Harper Ellen Wynne. This is my voice. And it ends with me." Then she screamed. A pure, raw scream. One that tore through every part of her body, every memory, every note she'd ever carried. She screamed until her throat bled. Until the lights burst. Until the spiral on her chest cracked and split and began to fade. The mouth howled. The children's voices stopped. The humming died. And then, only breath. Her own ragged alone. She hit stop. The tape clicked. And Harper collapsed, in silence. Finally, when Harper opened her eyes, the world was quiet. Not just absent of noise, but cleansed. The room around her, dim and dust-lit, felt like it had been carved out of time itself. Nothing moved. Nothing vibrated beneath the floorboards or hummed behind the walls. It was like stepping into a photograph of her own life, right at the edge of an ending. The recorder sat beside her, still, unblinking. The red light was off, the tape still warm from use. She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Her throat ached, shredded raw from the scream. Every breath tasted like iron and ash. Her body felt hollow, like she'd pulled something massive out of herself and left a crater behind. But the spiral was gone, not faded. Gone. No twitch beneath her collarbone. No heat, no itching, no invisible movement burrowing through her nerves. The symbol that had become part of her life, part of her body, was now just a memory. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Harper couldn't remember the last note of the song. It had worked. She had starved it, burned it out from the inside. Silenced it with a scream so sharp it had cut through the echo and found the thing that lived at its center. The place where the mouth had always waited. But something still lingered, something quiet, not malevolent, not yet. She rewound the tape, pressed play, and heard nothing. Not silence, absence. The kind of absence that had weight, like someone had erased a sound that was never meant to be removed. There should have been something. Her voice, her name, the scream. But the tape played like it had never been used. She fast, forwarded, stopped. Play still nothing, no static, no breath, no trace of her. It was like she had never spoken at all. She pressed her hand to her chest, panic rising again. No spiral, still gone. But the doubt returned. What had the mouth taken with it? Had she erased the spiral or herself? She looked around her apartment. Everything was where she left it, but it all felt off. Colors muted, shadows too still. The air didn't feel alive. It felt paused. She pulled her phone from her pocket. No signal, no time on the screen. Just a black display, pulsing once, faintly, like a dying heartbeat. She checked the windows. Outside, the world stood frozen. Cars mid-turn, birds mid-flap. People on the sidewalk, mouths open in half, formed sentences. She banged on the glass. No reaction. It wasn't the world that had changed. She had. The scream hadn't just ended the spiral. It had severed her. Torn her free from the shared rhythm of existence. She was no longer connected to the same time, the same sound as everyone else. She was outside of the choir now. Alone. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was exile, and still, the tape played on. Static, finally. Then, a sound. Not her voice. A child's whisper. It needed someone to leave. Now it has space. Now it can grow again. Harper's blood went cold. The mouth hadn't been defeated. It had been released. Not into her. Not into the world. Into the space she left behind. By silencing herself, she'd opened the final door. The one that no one could hear close. Because it no longer lived in words. It lived in absence. She stared at the recorder. Hit eject. The tape was warm, sticky to the touch, and labeled in a child's handwriting, Part 1. Her stomach dropped. Not the end. The beginning. There was never going to be a final scream. There was never going to be a last note. The mouth had learned too much. Now it didn't need a song. It just needed space. And she'd given it the cleanest canvas of all. A world where no one could hear her anymore. Where she was invisible. Where the silence carried her voice, not out loud, not audibly, but implied, in hesitation, in forgotten words. In the gaps between breath and answer, she stepped outside. The world was moving again. Cars rolled, people walked, birds flew. But no one looked at her. No one noticed, she shouted. No response. She touched someone's arm. They passed through her like smoke. And above them all, barely visible in the sky, was a spiral made of light, turning slowly, impossibly wide. The mouth had changed forms. Not song, not scream, not shadow. Now it was omission. It would erase the world one voice at a time, not with violence, with silence. Harper stood in the middle of it all, hands clenched. She had no mouth now. Not in the literal sense. In the existential one. She couldn't scream again. Couldn't speak. Couldn't warn. All she could do was watch as others began to forget words they had once known. Forget names. Forget songs they used to sing in the dark to ward off fear. The mouth wasn't coming anymore. It was here, and it was listening. The first name she forgot was her mother's. It slipped away in a moment so mundane she barely noticed. Reaching for a dusty picture frame on her shelf, staring into her mother's laughing eyes, lips caught mid-sentence in a long-ago summer snapshot, and then the name, once so immediate, so wrapped in warmth and sorrow, dissolved into silence. She opened her mouth to speak it, to pull it back from the void, but no sound came. Not even breath. Her chest tightened. She tried to remember her mother's voice instead, but all she could hear was the static lullaby. That familiar dissonant hush crept in like fog, filling every space where memory used to live. And then another name vanished, her father's. Then the city she grew up in. Then the first song she ever loved. Memory wasn't dying. It was being emptied, not stolen. Siphoned, like someone had uncorked her mind and was slowly, methodically draining every part of it that made her real. She stumbled through the streets, invisible to everyone, and yet completely present. Her body cast a shadow. Her footsteps disturbed the leaves. But no one saw her. No one flinched when she passed, not even when she screamed. But she couldn't scream anymore, not really. Her throat produced the motion. Her mouth shaped the attempt. But sound had divorced her. She was noise without volume, echo without origin. And everywhere she walked, she saw them. People forgetting. Subtle things first. A man checking his watch, puzzled by the numbers. A woman staring at her keys, unsure which door was hers. Children reciting rhymes in broken rhythm. Missing verses that should have been muscle memory. The world was unraveling. One silence at a time, and she was the still point in the center. The spiral had shifted again. No longer visual. No longer under skin. Now it was cognitive. A pattern hidden in forgetfulness. She ducked into a library, hoping for something, anything, to anchor herself. To find a word, a name, a phrase she hadn't lost. Rows of books towered around her, thick with knowledge and voices long dead. But when she pulled one down and opened it, blank pages. Hundreds of them, not torn out. Erased. She pulled another. Then another. All empty. The mouth had found its final shape. It was not a song. It was absence. It had moved beyond melody, beyond echo, beyond ritual. Now it fed on the most fragile thing a human could carry, remembrance. And Harper, in her final defiance, had become the petri dish. Her silence hadn't ended the cycle. It had only pushed it deeper. Made it subtle. Made it smarter. Made it untraceable. She began writing. Pen to skin. Names. Words. Fragments. My name is Harper Ellen Wynne. My mother had green eyes. I lived on Rose Hill Street. My favorite color is... She stopped. The word was gone. The color was gone. She stared at her arm, watching the ink shimmer, then vanish. One by one, the letters bled into her skin and disappeared like sugar in water. The mouth was not removing the world. It was digesting it. And now, the more she remembered, the faster it consumed, because attention was fuel, recognition was nourishment, and she, Harper, the girl who stared too long into the dark and dared to give it a name, had made it known. Her defiance had been a flare, her scream, an invitation. Now the mouth no longer needed her body. It had learned how to feed from the shadows, from between spoken words, from the moments we shrug off, the names we forget, the songs we hum absent-mindedly and can't finish. That's where it hid now. In all of us. Harper fled the library, the blank pages fluttering behind her like wings with no message to carry. The city was quieter than it had ever been, and yet not peaceful. There was a tension in the silence, a readiness, like the whole world was leaning toward her, breath held, waiting for the next syllable she would try to speak, so it could swallow that too. She returned to the church, the ruin, the place where the mouth once had shape and sound and boundary. It was nothing but ash and twisted beams now. But the center still existed, a perfect, circular impression in the soil, untouched by time or nature. She stepped into it. The air shifted. It was listening. "Take me back," she whispered, though she knew the words would never reach anyone's ears but her own. "Take me, not them." No reply. Only the hush, a velvet silence. Then, a voice, not hers. Not the mouth's, a boy. Young. Unfamiliar. "What's your name?" She turned. Behind her, a child stood in the shadow of the collapsed doorway, eyes wide. Blank. But not empty. He was still real, still whole. Harper opened her mouth, tried to answer, but nothing came, not even a break. Because her name, her last thread, was now gone. She looked into the boy's face, willing herself to speak, to remember, but she couldn't. And in that moment, she understood the mouth's final cruelty. It didn't need her to die. It only needed her to forget who she was, so it could become all that remained. The boy stared up at her with a curious tilt to his head, his voice still ringing in her ears, not because of volume, but because it registered. In this fading world, where silence had bled into every corner of memory, the very fact that she could still hear someone else speak felt unnatural, wrong, miraculous. His question hung there, waiting for an answer she no longer had. "What's your name?" The words clung to her skin like damp fabric. She could still feel the shape of her name somewhere deep inside her chest, like a word on the tip of her tongue, buried beneath 1,000 forgettings. But when she reached for it, when she tried to pull it forward, there was only the ache. That soft, excruciating void where identity used to live. She tried again anyway. Her lips moved. Silence. The boy frowned. "Did you forget?" His tone wasn't mocking. It wasn't even surprised. It was simply expected. As though forgetting names had become ordinary now, like misplacing your keys or waking from a dream you couldn't hold on to. Harper, if that was still her name, nodded. And that's when the boy did something strange. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tape recorder. It was ancient looking, worn along the edges. And wrapped around it, etched with a black marker, was a spiral. A crude one, childlike. "You dropped this," he said. She didn't remember dropping anything. She didn't remember having one in the first place anymore. But when she reached out and touched it, a bolt of recognition shot through her bones. Not memory, not clarity, just a feeling, a pull, like the recorder wasn't just hers, it was her, or what remained of her. The boy pressed play. Static, then, a whisper, her voice. Not speaking, singing, not the lullaby, not the old mouth song. This was different, a new pattern, just a few notes. Raw, rough human. But it was hers. And for a fraction of a second, something shifted in the spiral. The air grew warmer, less taut. And her name, like a match struck in the dark, flickered back into being. Harper. She gasped, the word crashing out of her like a confession. The boy smiled. "That's it." He handed her the recorder. "I found it," he said. It was playing something. I think it's yours. Harper clutched it like a lifeline. She wanted to cry, but even her tears felt foreign now, like borrowed water in borrowed skin. How did you hear me? She asked. The boy shrugged. I don't know. I think I didn't forget yet. A horrible thought settled in her chest. He was next. The mouth had begun to drain the world, but it hadn't yet reached everyone. There were still islands of resistance, flickers of people untouched. But for how long? She looked around them, at the burned church, at the sky above. The spiral still lingered faintly, etched into the clouds, moving slowly, almost lazily, like it had already won and was simply enjoying the echo of its triumph. But the tape recorder buzzed softly in her hands, not with sound, but presence. It had caught something, a sliver of her voice the mouth hadn't swallowed, a thread of self, and maybe that was the way out. Not a final scream, not silence, but memory. Something made of rhythm and truth, something that couldn't be erased because it was witnessed. She turned to the boy. You remember what I said, right? He nodded. Good, she whispered. Then say it. Say my name, out loud. He did. Harper. The spiral flickered. It didn't like that. Didn't want names repeated. Especially not ones it thought it had consumed. And now she understood the mouth's final weakness. It wasn't sound it feared. It was recognition. To be seen, to be understood, was to be caged. That's why it hid in lullabies, in silence, in the hollow between names. But if enough people remembered, not just the song, but the person who survived it, then maybe it could be kept small, contained, weak. She turned to the boy again. You have to help me. We have to tell people. Not just about the spiral, about me, about what happened. Say might loud. Say it often. He blinked. What if they forget again? Then remind them. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear, from purpose. The mouth had shifted into something formless, but it had forgotten one thing: humans write things down. They record. They remember in each other. It couldn't erase that. Not completely. She clicked the recorder again. This is Harper Ellen Wynne. I'm alive. I fought the mouth. I survived it. I still remember. And you can too. Her voice echoed through the ruins, and somewhere, faint but clear, she heard it mirrored back. A second voice. Then a third. Then a fourth. People whispering her name. People remembering. The spiral in the sky twisted sharply, then slowed. The air grew heavy. Not with threat, but with resistance. This wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was a line, a place to start, and in a world slowly forgetting itself. That was everything. It began with names. Small, scattered recoveries whispered in alleyways, scribbled onto napkins, spoken aloud in crowded rooms where people had started to notice the quiet. Harper could feel it in the air. Not the mouth's silence. Ours. Human silence. The kind that came from growing fear. The kind that settled into throats like dust and kept people from asking questions they didn't know how to hear the answers to. But some had started to speak again. Her name, Harper Ellen Wynne, appeared in strange places. A bathroom wall at the train station. A chalk scrawl on the side of a mailbox. A voice message left on a stranger's answering machine with no explanation. Each time, the same simple line was spoken like a lifeline. Harper remembers. You can too. And the spiral. It grew angry. Or maybe not angry. Agitated. Because the mouth didn't have emotion. Not really. It was rhythm and hunger and absence. But it could feel its grip loosening. Not because Harper had wounded it, but because she'd done something worse. She'd complicated it. The mouth had always thrived in simplicity, in repetition, in the lazy hum of lullabies passed down by generations, too tired to wonder where the tune came from. In the sigh of a mother rocking her baby, not knowing the words meant something once. But now, there were names inside the songs. Intent. Meaning. Identity. Harper had taught people how to listen again, and once people truly listen, they don't forget as easily. Still, she couldn't stop what was already unraveling. The mouth hadn't been defeated. It had just learned to wait. and it was still feeding. People were disappearing now, but not from sight, from memory. A man would walk into a store, speak to 5 people, and the moment he left, none of them could recall his face. A girl would leave her school, and her name would vanish from attendance records, from group chats, from her parents' minds. She'd be left adrift, unmoored, living in the hollow space where the spiral whispered. The mouth had moved beyond sound. It had embedded itself in recognition itself. So Harper built an archive. Not a library, not a digital database. Those had already started glitching, losing data, scrambling letters into spirals. This was something older, rawer. She started with paper, pens, cassette tapes, typewriters, things the mouth had a harder time bleeding into. She collected stories, she recorded names, she drew faces. At first, she worked alone. Dozens of pages, then hundreds, then thousands. She mapped out the people she could still remember: Sam, her parents, her childhood dog, the librarian who once told her not all stories need heroes, the barista who remembered her usual order even when she didn't. Faces with dates, memories that had texture, sounds, smells, colors. But it wasn't enough. She wasn't immune. Names still slipped through her fingers like smoke, and so she let others help. The boy from the church returned, this time with 3 more kids. One carried a notebook filled with scribbles and remembered conversations. Another brought her grandmother's diary, written in neat lines all the way back to 1953, ending abruptly with an entry titled "The Dream with the Mouth Again." The third had a scar across her neck and a voice so faint it barely counted, but she could sign. And in her signs, she told stories Harper had never heard before, of entire families waking up with no memories of their own names, of mirrors that reflected strangers, of lullabies that left bruises under the tongue. They became the core, the quiet resistance. They called themselves the Rememberers, not fighters, not believers, just those who refused to forget. But it wasn't a war, not yet. It was something slower, a cold war of memory, of who could keep what longer. And the mouth, it adapted. It learned their patterns. It began to infect memory anchors. Things like old photographs grew fuzzy around the edges. Sentences in journals began to change. You'd remember a name, only to find the letters rearranged the next day. It wasn't trying to erase anymore. It was trying to replace, to rewrite. That was the next evolution: false memory. People began recalling events that never happened, hearing songs that never existed, swearing they'd never met someone, even while holding proof in their hands. It wasn't just stealing anymore. It was gaslighting the world, one story at a time, and yet Harper kept writing, kept recording. Even when her hand cramped, even when the ink blotted, even when her voice wavered and faltered on tape, because she knew what they were building wasn't a defense. It was a seed, a fragile truth, passed person to person, memory to memory, too human to be replicated. There was power in that, not weaponized power, not glory, just endurance. The mouth could consume echoes, but it couldn't truly replicate intent. It could twist a song, warp a memory, drown a name in silence, but it couldn't mean anything by it. It was hunger with no mouth, sound with no soul. That was its flaw, and their only edge. So Harper made the archive personal. She pressed her own blood into the page. She whispered her truths into stone. She scratched her name into glass, not because it would stop the spiral, but because she would know it was real, and someone, someday, might find it, might say it aloud, might remember her, because the mouth only wins if everyone forgets, and Harper Ellen Wynne wasn't ready to be forgotten. Not now, not ever. It happened on a Wednesday, though Harper couldn't be sure. The days had become inconsistent, folding over each other in ways that felt intentional. Sometimes she would wake to find the sun stuck at dusk for hours. Other times, nightfall arrived halfway through breakfast. The passage of time had begun to mirror the spiral, repeating, bending, circling back in on itself. Even the clocks had stopped arguing. They simply blinked. That morning, if it could be called that, she found a notebook on her windowsill. Not one of hers. It was weather worn, speckled with ash, and wrapped in twine. Inside were pages written in her own handwriting, but she hadn't written them. She flipped through them, hands trembling. Paragraphs about people she hadn't met, places she'd never been, events that hadn't happened yet. It was her voice, unmistakable in tone and phrasing, but used to tell a story she hadn't lived. Every page ended with a symbol, not a spiral. A question mark, drawn backward, curved unnaturally, like it had been copied from memory that didn't quite trust itself. The implications hit like a wave. The mouth wasn't just erasing memory anymore. It was writing new ones. Writing her. Somewhere along the timeline, the spiral had grown tired of stealing voices. Now it was using hers, creating events she couldn't separate from real ones, memories that felt warm, sharp, painful, honest. But weren't. The worst part, they were good, the fake memories. They held beauty, joy, even peace. A moment with Sam where they laughed so hard she fell off the porch. A night with her mother singing a lullaby that never ended in silence. A bookshop in some forgotten city where everyone knew her name and no one hummed. She didn't want to erase them. That's how it had shifted again. The mouth had realized erasure had limits, so it began to rewrite the archive. And now Harper was standing in the middle of two overlapping versions of herself. The real one, tired and cracked and bleeding memory, and the one the spiral had made. The one with hope. The one with comfort. The one who had already given in. She screamed, not from fear, from defiance. Stop usagmy vishi. Her window shattered. The notebook burst into flames in her hands, curling black and red, and then falling into ash like everything else the mouth touched. The smoke twisted as it rose, forming not a spiral, but her face. Just for a moment, a perfect mimicry, and then it vanished, scattered by a breeze that didn't touch anything else. It was official now. The mouth no longer needed the song, or the children, or the church. It only needed her, not physically, conceptually. She had become the prototype, the beta test, the story too many had already heard, the song too many had half hummed. Even in resistance, she'd become the symbol, and that was all the mouth needed to evolve. It was becoming narrative, in books, in dreams, in false memories whispered between old friends about a girl they swear they once knew who disappeared. It was spreading through story, and Harper knew the danger in that, because humans believe stories more than they believe facts, more than they believe warnings. Stories become real even when they aren't, especially when they aren't. So she made a decision. If the mouth wanted her as a story, then she would write herself first. Beat it to its own punch. She dug through the archive, found an unused cassette, sat at the table with her oldest tape recorder, clicked record, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't speak in fear. She didn't beg or warn or plead. She told a story. Her story, start to finish. No spirals, no singing, no magic. Just Harper Ellen Wynne, the child who heard the wrong lullaby, the girl who lost her family to forgetfulness, the woman who screamed her name back into existence. She spoke it all, the messy, human truth. And when the tape ended, she copied it, made a dozen more, taped them beneath park benches, slipped them into library return slots, left one in the church ruins under the dirt, even recorded parts onto voicemail machines. She knew some would be found, listened to. And that meant, even if the mouth twisted her into something unrecognizable, there would still be one thread someone could follow back to who she really was. She couldn't stop the spiral, not entirely, but she could anchor herself. In voice, in story, in truth. And if others started doing the same, if everyone refused the false memories and held tight to the ragged, painful, real ones, then maybe, just maybe, the spiral wouldn't hold, the mouth wouldn't finish. It would remain a half-told tale, whispered with caution, guarded by those who knew silence wasn't safety. And Harper, she would remain, If not alive, then remembered. And that was enough. The cassette tapes didn't change the world overnight. No miraculous uprising, no thunderous awakening of minds breaking free of the mouth's haze. But something small began to shift, subtle as breath, delicate as a thread tugged gently in a vast and fraying tapestry. Harper didn't expect cheers or crowds. She expected silence. She expected indifference. But what she got was response. The first came from a janitor at a closed-down high school on the edge of the city. He found a tape lodged behind a vending machine. He didn't know why he played it, just that he had to. And when he heard her voice, calm, steady, unapologetically human, he sat down on the dusty tile floor and wept. Not because he recognized her, but because he didn't. And that absence felt wrong, like something vital had been misplaced inside him, and she had named it. 2 days later, a woman in her 80s called every number in her phone, asking if anyone remembered a girl named Harper. She couldn't sleep, said the voice on the tape reminded her of someone from her dreams. Someone important. Someone she loved and lost, and was only just beginning to recall. Then came the man in the radio tower. That one changed everything. He found a copy Harper had wedged between the fence posts of a broadcasting station half dead from disuse. Old school. Analog. The kind the mouth hadn't reached yet, because no one thought it mattered. But he still did his weekly broadcasts to nobody, static and dead air. Just in case the world remembered how to listen, he played the tape. Not once, but every hour on the hour. Harper Ellen Wynne, the voice echoed, crackling across the airwaves. I'm real, I was here, I still am. And so are you. People began to tune in. Not many, a few hundred, maybe. Then 1,000. They didn't know what they were listening to. But they heard the tone, the shape of truth, the weight of real memory fighting to stay alive. And that's when the spiral changed again. It panicked. It lashed out. People who had once only lost names began losing faces. Conversations unraveled halfway through, ending in blank stares. Whole towns woke up and couldn't remember which road led home. Mirrors stopped reflecting what they should. Some showed strangers. Others showed nothing. The mouth had grown bloated, unstable. Harper knew the signs. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. But it was reeling, because it had grown too fast. Fed on too much, and it couldn't keep its grip on everything. So it began discarding what it couldn't digest. That meant some memories were returning. Names that had slipped from minds days ago came back like dreams after rain. People started writing things down compulsively. Journals, napkins, tattoos. It became instinctual. Some didn't even know why they were doing it. Harper watched it unfold from the rooftop of her building, knees drawn to her chest, tape recorder in hand. She heard her own voice drifting from a truck, radio far below. Not singing, not warning, just speaking, telling stories about the spiral, the mouth, herself. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone in the silence. But it wasn't over, not even close, because that night the mouth retaliated, not with noise, but with something worse. It gave her back a memory, a real one, and she wished it hadn't. It came as a dream, so vivid it couldn't be dismissed. She was 5 again, back in the room with the soft green walls and the mobile of hanging stars. Her mother hummed to her from the rocking chair. But the melody was twisted now. Harper could hear it clearly, the first time the mouth ever entered her world. Hidden in the hum, soft, insidious. And her mother had been the first to carry it. The truth shattered her. She hadn't found the mouth. She had inherited it. The lullaby she thought had come from nowhere had been passed to her. Gently, lovingly. By someone who didn't even know she was handing down a curse. And Harper had kept singing. She had made it worse. She had spread it. Even before she knew it had a name. Even before she could understand what it meant to remember. She woke up with tears drying on her cheeks, and a single phrase carved into her bedroom wall. It's still in you. Not written, etched, with fingernails, her own. The mouth had burrowed deep, deeper than she ever imagined. It had left roots inside her that no scream, no story, no archive could fully reach. But that wasn't the message. The message was this: it wasn't just her fight anymore. The mouth had always been inherited. Through song, through stories, through trauma disguised as tradition. And now, people were choosing whether to pass it on or end it. Each time someone sang the wrong tune, they risked giving it form again. But every time someone named it, every time someone said Harper aloud, remembered what was real and what was not, the spiral trembled. Harper stood in the doorway of her apartment, knife in one hand, tape recorder in the other. She didn't intend to hurt herself. She intended to carve her name into every doorframe in the city. If the mouth wanted a legacy, she would give it one, but not of silence, of defiance, of names etched into dust and wood and bone, so that when the spiral returned, as it always did, it would find the walls already whispering back. Harper Ellen Wynne, still here, still remembered, still fighting. The first child started humming again, not on purpose, not with malice or intent. Just a simple, wandering tune on a cracked swing set at the edge of a forgotten park. 4 notes, barely coherent, spilling from her lips like instinct. Harper heard it from across the street, nearly dropping the can of black paint she was using to stencil her name on the side of a mailbox. The sound struck her like a cold gust through warm skin. Not the tune itself, but the shape of it. The way it curled upward, then inward, like a question being asked in a dead language. A spiral made from sound. She approached the playground slowly, heart hammering. The girl looked about 6, maybe 7. Hair in wild knots. Shoes too big. Her eyes were closed, and she swayed as she sang, as though the melody moved her like tide. Harper spoke gently. "Hey." The girl stopped, but didn't open her eyes. Instead, she tilted her head to the side, as though listening to something Harper couldn't hear. "Who taught you that?" Harper asked. The girl smiled faintly. "No one. I just knew it." Harper's stomach dropped. She stepped closer, crouched until they were level. "Did you dream it?" The girl shook her head. "It was already in me." That was what Harper feared most. The mouth wasn't using lullabies anymore. It had graduated. Now it was skipping transmission, going straight to origin, embedding its rhythm not in memory, but in instinct. Children were beginning to be born with fragments of the spiral's melody already nested in their minds, not as a song, but as impulse, as comfort, as the sound the body makes when it's alone too long, and no one could trace it. Because how do you trace something that didn't need teaching? Harper sat beside the girl on the swing, uncertain of what she should say. She could feel the mouth watching, not directly, not like a creature in a forest, but through pattern, through coincidence. A leaf falling just as she inhaled, the creak of the swing, matching her heartbeat, the eerie way the clouds above spun just slightly, imperceptibly, in the direction her thoughts turned. The girl opened her eyes. They were clear, untouched, but for how long? "Do you know who I am?" Harper asked. The girl nodded without hesitation. "You're the name my mom says in her sleep." Harper froze. "You mean she remembers?" "She doesn't know she does," the girl said softly. "But I hear her whisper it sometimes. When the nights are wrong. The nights are wrong." Harper had no better way to describe them either. She stood and gently took the girl's hand. "You can't hum that song anymore," she said, "even if it feels like yours. Even if it makes you feel safe." The girl looked up, suddenly older than her years. "I know," she whispered. "It's not for people. It's for something else." And there it was again. The awareness, not in full, but budding. The mouth wasn't just reaching into instinct. It was growing intelligence. It was training children before they could speak, embedding rhythms that felt natural, felt innate. When they were anything but, it wasn't moving faster. It was moving deeper. Harper walked the girl home, found a single mother, half asleep on her couch, a tape of static still spinning on the old TV in the background. She handed the child off with care, scribbled her name in big black letters on the fridge with a marker, then left before anyone asked questions. She needed help. Not from resistance. Not from people. From something older. Something that remembered before remembering had rules. She went to the woods. The place Sam had told her about. The one where the spiral had once been summoned by accident. The clearing with the rocks arranged in a circle no one claimed responsibility for. Harper knelt in the center, set her tape recorder down, and pressed record. She didn't speak this time. She listened, to the wind through the branches, to the creaking of roots below, to the hush of everything old and unseen. She stayed there until night, and when she finally played the tape back, there was no static, only one word, whispered, root, and she understood. The mouth didn't start with her, or her mother, or the church. It started before language, before lullabies, before sound. Its first spiral wasn't heard, it was felt, in the soil, in the pattern of fire around the bones of ancestors, in how grief turns a body inward, curling like a shell. It was seated in the ache of existence itself, and that meant it couldn't be silenced. Not forever. Only kept in check, by reminders, by carving truth deep into the skin of the earth, by naming things over and over, until forgetting them became unnatural. Harper pulled out a knife, not for harm, for etching, and she began to carve into the stones of the clearing, not symbols, not spells, names, her mother, Sam, the janitor, the boy from the church, the girl on the swing, her own, over and over again, until her hands were raw and the stones bled flakes of dust into the dark. And when she finished, she sat in the middle and whispered, if it wants to sing, it'll have to sing through this. The stones didn't answer, but something changed in the air, like a dissonance had been resolved, a tension released. The mouth wasn't gone. It would never be gone. But tonight, it would struggle. And in the hollow between its notes, Harper would stay awake. The stone carvings bled dust for days. Harper returned to the clearing every morning, half afraid the names would be gone. But they remained, raw, jagged, imperfect. Human. The mouth couldn't unwrite them. Not easily. Not while she remembered the feel of the knife in her hand, the sting in her fingers as each letter cut deeper into something older than memory. But it fought back. It always did. That week, Harper began forgetting not just people, but places. Streets she'd walked for years warped in her mind. She would turn a corner and find herself in alleyways she didn't recognize, even though her own handwriting was sprayed in paint across the bricks. Harper Ellen Wynne. You are still here. Once, she passed a mirror in a thrift shop window and didn't see her reflection, not gone, replaced. A woman stared back with her same eyes, but none of her exhaustion, none of her scars, none of the grief coiled into her posture. Just blankness, a clean version, a rewritten Harper. She kept walking. That night, she dreamt she was a librarian again, but not in her old building. This one was underground, endless, and the books blood ink like open wounds. Each spine bore a name she didn't recognize. Each page, blank until touched. When she ran her fingers across one, it filled with a life that wasn't hers. A girl with her voice, her habits, her fears, but a different childhood, a different path, a spiraled self. She screamed awake. The mouth had moved into fiction. And now, it was rewriting the world not through sound or silence, but through plausibility. By building versions of people. Ones close enough that no one questioned the difference. Ones safer, easier, more forgettable. That was the newest horror. It wasn't erasing anymore. It was improving you, tidying your edges, removing the inconvenient details that make a person stick. It had realized the best way to kill memory wasn't destruction. It was correction. And Harper was starting to lose track of which memories were real. She remembered Sam with green eyes, but then found a photo with brown. She recalled her mother's hands always warm, but a tape recording said she wore gloves even in July. Small shifts, hairline fractures in the truth, and the worst part was, She believed both versions at the same time. Because that's what happens when you start questioning your own memory. You open the door, and the mouth walks right in. But Harper had one weapon left. The wrongness, that quiet gut clench when something doesn't sit right, when a dream looks too clean, when a memory comes too easily, too perfect, like it was placed there rather than lived. She began chasing that wrongness. Every time she felt it, she marked it. Red thread on a map of the city, pinned at intersections where déjà vu struck hardest. Notes on a wall, connecting inconsistencies. People who remembered her in two different places at once. Sounds that never repeated the same way twice. Her room became a web of disbelief, a shrine to discontinuity. She was no longer cataloging what she knew. She was tracking what she doubted. And that was what the mouth couldn't fight, because doubt is resistance. It forces attention. And attention is the one thing the spiral can't metabolize quickly. It slows it down, makes it sputter, makes it visible. And then came the call. A girl on the other end of a payphone Harper didn't remember installing. She spoke fast, breathless. Words slamming together in a single gasping sentence. "It's writing me. Please say my name. I don't remember if I'm real anymore. My face is wrong. My cat's name changed. Say my name, please, say it out loud." Harper didn't hesitate. "Tell me, Lena, 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 Lena." She said again, louder each time, like a chant, like a spell. There was silence, then a sigh, then a small, wet laugh. Okay, that's better. I'm writing it down now, thank you." The call ended. No goodbye, just a click. Harper stared at the receiver in her hand. This was spreading. People were noticing. People were fighting, not with torches or knives, but with repetition, with name saying, with a stubborn clinging to the parts of themselves that the mouth hadn't fully rewritten yet. The cracks were showing. And that meant something else. The mouth was scared, because it had pushed too far. The edits were becoming obvious. The rewritten selves were glitching, laughing a half, second late, blinking out of sync, saying things no one prompted. People were noticing, and they were starting to compare stories. Harper turned back to her web of doubt, her memory map, her red, threaded archive. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't orderly, but it was hers, still messy, still flawed, still true, and that was the key. Because truth, real truth, doesn't feel perfect. It feels complicated, heavy, ugly, alive. She stood back and looked at the wall, at the overlapping stories, the misspelled names, the contradictions. This was what survival looked like. Not clarity, but conflict. And she was ready to keep fighting, not to win, just to exist. Because in a world being polished into silence, the most powerful act left, was to be messily, stubbornly, undeniably human. There was a man at the edge of the city who never forgot anything. At least, that's what people whispered. His name was Doyle. Harper found him by accident, through a footnote scribbled in the margin of a borrowed journal she barely remembered reading. "Just a line," asked Doyle. He remembers the old names, nothing else, no address, no contact, just that name, tucked between lines about flickering streetlights and music heard beneath floorboards. It took Harper 3 days to track him down. Not because he was hiding, but because the mouth wanted her distracted. On her way there, she lost her wallet twice. Found it once in a trash can, the other time folded inside a mailbox she had no recollection of opening. Time blurred. A woman bumped into her, and, in that brief contact, whispered something in her ear she couldn't remember seconds later. Just the shape of the breath against her neck, cold as smoke. But eventually, she found Doyle. He lived in a collapsed observatory. The dome had caved in years ago, but the foundation held. Rusted metal, cracked tile, shattered glass beneath scattered leaves, and inside, rows of shelves made from salvaged wood and spine, split books, none of which had covers. Just pages, loose, torn, hand-numbered. He sat among them like a ghost in a library made from memory. He looked up when Harper entered but said nothing. only gestured for her to sit. She did, and the silence settled between them like fog. Then he spoke. "They're not stories," he said. "They're recordings. People think memory is imagination, but it's not. It's evidence, scar tissue, proof." Harper leaned forward. "You remember the original ones?" Doyle nodded slowly. "Before the mouth rewrote them. Before it learned how to make them better." That struck something in her. That word again. Better. The mouth's biggest lie. It didn't want to destroy. It wanted to edit. Smooth the rough edges. Erase trauma. Replace the awful with the palatable. That was its trick. It promised healing. But what it really offered was amputation. It took the pain, and the strength that pain forged. It dulled the grief, and the love that came before it. Harper asked the question that had been clawing at her ribs since the dream of her mother. "How do I know which memories are mine?" Doyle didn't hesitate. "You don't. Not anymore." Then, softer, "But that doesn't mean they're not yours. Even if they've been rewritten. Even if they've been tampered with. The moment you doubt them, the moment you ask, that's you taking them back. The mouth can't copy doubt. It doesn't understand contradiction. It hates it." He pulled a tattered page from a nearby stack and handed it to her. It had only 3 lines, written in faded ink. "My name is Mara. I died twice. Once in the story they gave me, and once in the one I chose." Harper read it twice, heart thrumming. Doyle whispered, "Mara never existed. Not anymore. But I remember her anyway. So she still does." "Yes." Harper looked around the room. Every book, every note, every scribbled half-sentence. They were survivors. Not people, but pieces of people. Preserved not for clarity, but for contradiction. Doyle hadn't cataloged what was real. He'd cataloged what felt wrong. The false edits. The overwritten names. The memories that made no sense, but kept showing up. "I want to add to it," she said. He nodded. "No ceremony, no ritual, just a pen and a blank page." She wrote, "I'm Harper Ellen Wynne. I remember pain. I remember forgetting. I remember the moment I screamed loud enough to shake the spiral loose from the sky." She placed the page on the table. Doyle placed a rock on top of it. "It'll be here when you forget again," he said gently. Because that was the truth. She would forget. They all would. That's how the mouth worked. Not in violence, but in the slow fade, the incremental rot. You don't feel yourself slipping until you're already lost. But what the mouth still didn't understand, and maybe never would, was that people have instincts too. Not like it's programming, not pure repetition, but something messier, wilder, deeper. We write on walls, we whisper secrets, we name children after ghosts. We keep photos even when we don't know who's in them. We trace letters we can't read because they feel important. The mouth had its spiral, but humans had scraps, and we never stop collecting them, even when we don't know why, even when the meaning is gone, even when the stories hurt, especially then, because the spiral wants silence, clean endings, finished songs. But people, we want chapters, we want footnotes, we want to linger. As Harper left the observatory, the wind picked up. She didn't look back, didn't need to. The story was behind her now, waiting, holding her name like a knife. It started as a rumor, whispers traded in back rooms of thrift stores, overheard on night buses, mumbled during sleepwalking episodes no one could remember starting. There were rooms appearing across the city, rooms where they didn't belong, a door where a blank wall had always been, a hallway longer than the building should allow, an attic that was never accessible, now wide open and waiting. The people who entered them always came back different, or didn't come back at all. Harper heard the first story from a woman in a laundromat whose son had wandered into what he called the echo room, a basement closet that hadn't been there the week before. He stepped in chasing a toy car. She found him standing still 15 minutes later, staring at a blank wall, silent, eyes wet but not crying. When she asked what he saw, he said, "My real birthday," and nothing else. He hadn't spoken since. The rooms had no pattern. They appeared in public buildings, abandoned homes. Even one in the freezer section of a grocery store. Harper tracked each story like a bloodhound, pinning them on her wall of doubt. When she connected the locations, a shape began to emerge, not a perfect spiral, but something close. A fractured loop, a broken circle. They weren't random, they were symptoms. The mouth was bleeding into architecture now, not as hallucination, as fact, because it had learned the last defense people had: physical space. Familiarity. The comfort of this is how it's always looked. So now, even walls lied. And Harper realized something worse. Maybe the rooms had always been there. Maybe the mouth wasn't creating them. Maybe it was just finally letting us see them. She visited her old school one night. It had closed down a year before, when half the teachers stopped recognizing their students. A place where kids forgot how to read in unison, where bells rang at the wrong times and announcements came in the wrong voices. The building was caged in yellow tape and broken promises, but Harper knew how to get in. The main hall smelled of dust and wax. Familiar, safe, but the door to the art supply closet was cracked open. Though it had always been locked, she stepped through. It wasn't a closet anymore. It was a library, not like Doyle's, not made of scraps and salvaged pages. This was pristine. Marble floors, towering shelves, a quiet that felt alive. She moved between the rows, heart pounding, and saw that every book bore a name she recognized, not from her life, but from the wall of doubt. Lena, Mara Doyle, Sam. She pulled one off the shelf. It was blank. Then, as her fingers brushed the page, ink bled through. Words scrawled themselves across the paper, messy, inconsistent, some crossed out, rewritten, reversed. Her own handwriting, but twisted, as though someone else were mimicking her voice with cracked teeth and a broken wrist. "You aren't the original," it said. "You are one of many, a test subject, a successful replication." She dropped the book, staggered backward. The shelves around her began to shift, not visibly, not like something moving, but she could feel them watching, the same way the mouth did, not with eyes, but with pattern. A rhythmic presence, as if the heartbeat of the room had quickened. A low hum started to rise. Not a song, a memory. Her father, brushing the hair out of her eyes when she was 6. Her first kiss. The way Sam used to mouth words to songs she didn't know. All rushing back, overlapping, overloading. Too many things at once, all of them true, all of them hers, but they didn't fit together. Not anymore. Because that was the mouth's trap. It wasn't just about taking. It was about giving too much. It flooded the brain with every version of you it could find. The one who stayed. The one who left. The one who never asked questions. The one who didn't make it out of the church. It piled them up inside you until you couldn't tell who you were without sorting through the debris. Harper clutched her temples. She screamed, and for the first time the room answered. It hummed her scream back at her, twisted, flattened, reversed, mocking. Then it spoke, not in a voice, but in letters flickering across the spine of every book on the shelves, one after the other. Wayu umari omu raitan te oo. The fear didn't come all at once. It trickled in, like cold water through cracks in your boots, because part of her believed it. What if she wasn't the first Harper? What if she was a product of the mouth, a fabrication made flesh just to test how far memory could stretch before it snapped? What if all of this was a story the mouth was telling itself? She ran. Back through the art room, down the hallway, past the sagging lockers and peeling paint. She burst into the night and didn't stop until the streetlights turned unfamiliar again. She didn't remember how she got home. Only that she did. And when she peeled off her coat, there was a slip of paper in her pocket. She hadn't put it there. One sentence, written in red ink. Even if you're not the first, you're the one still fighting. That's what makes you real. Harper didn't sleep. Couldn't. She sat against her door with her knife and her pen, staring at her reflection in the darkened TV screen. Not moving. not humming. Just remembering. Not everything. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to know the mouth hadn't won. Not yet. And tomorrow, she was going to find another room and walk into it on purpose. It waited for her. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way, like a glowing doorway or a flickering light at the end of a hallway. It simply was tucked into the boiler room of an apartment complex she had never lived in, but somehow remembered sleeping in as a child. The walls were still painted that sickly beige she always associated with waiting rooms and lost time. No markings. No windows. Just the hum of ancient pipes and the faint, rhythmic knock of something deep in the system. Too steady to be plumbing, too purposeful to be dismissed. Harper stood in front of the door for a long time before touching it. No handle, no lock. Just a thin line where one world ended and another began. She pressed her palm against it, and it opened. Not swung, not slid, just folded like paper creased too many times. Inside was her. Not a version of her. Not a clone. Not a dream. It was the room that knew her. The air carried her voice. Fragments of conversations she'd had years ago. Lines she hadn't spoken since she was a child. Arguments whispered in shame. Laughs she thought she'd forgotten. They echoed through the walls, as if the space had recorded her life and was now playing it back without care for order. And the smell. God, the smell. Not of rot or blood or damp like so many of the other places. It smelled like the inside of her mother's sweater. Like childhood baths. Like the dust of old books she wasn't supposed to touch. This wasn't a trap. It was a replica. The room had remembered her before she remembered herself. She stepped inside. The door didn't close behind her. It didn't need to. She knew that once you entered a memory like this, leaving wasn't about walking away. It was about knowing the exit existed in the first place. The floor creaked underfoot in a rhythm that matched her pulse. The lights didn't flicker. They breathed. Soft, warm, and constant. On the far side of the room, there was a desk. Old wood, varnish peeling at the edges. On it, a single item, a spiral-bound notebook. Her name was written on the cover. She opened it. The first page was blank, so was the second. Then, on the third, in looping handwriting that was definitely her own, only shakier, more scared, was a sentence. You didn't make it out. I did. She froze. It wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. Someone, some version, had left her behind. And now that version was writing, documenting, trying to preserve something Harper had failed to hold on to. The pages that followed were inconsistent. Some filled with full thoughts. Others just fragments. Memories of the old church. The humming in the cellar. Sam's laugh. The first time she saw her reflection blink when she didn't. Then, halfway through the notebook, a drawing. A perfect spiral. But this one was shattered. Not broken, not incomplete. Shattered. Like a mirror dropped at someone's feet. Each piece reflecting a different moment. A different truth. A different Harper. She didn't know how long she stood there, turning the pages, heart pounding, tears tracking slowly down her cheeks. Because this wasn't just a recording. This wasn't just the mouth's version of her, trying to fool her again. This was something else. An archive she hadn't built, but someone like her had. A survivor, a predecessor, or maybe a successor. Someone who'd faced the mouth and walked out the other side, changed but not erased. Harper flipped to the final page. One last line, there's more of us. She closed the notebook slowly, breath caught in her throat. It made sense now. The reason the mouth was growing erratic, the reason it was overextending, glitching, exposing itself through dreams and false rooms and misremembered birthdays. It wasn't just her anymore. The others, whoever they were, had started fighting back, not loudly, not with fire, but with story, and the mouth, so accustomed to being the only author, was panicking. Because it couldn't control every narrative, especially not the ones passed in secret, not the ones scratched on bathroom stalls, or recorded on dead airwaves, or left in abandoned, spiral notebooks, hidden in rooms that shouldn't exist. There was still time, not to defeat it, but to scatter, to spread the mess, because the spiral needed coherence. It needed consistency. It fed on belief in a single, seamless version. But stories, real, human stories, they thrived in disorder. Harper took the notebook and walked out. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. The room had served its purpose, and now she had a mission. To find the others, to gather the broken Harpers. The Sams who made it halfway, the Lenas who didn't forget fast enough, the Doyles still stacking their shelves with contradictions. She would connect them, even if only through whispers, even if only through fragments, because if enough voices sang the wrong tune at once, the mouth would choke on the dissonance. And somewhere in that noise, she might finally hear herself again. Not rewritten, not corrected, not improved. Just Harper, still cracked, still real, still here. The rain didn't start until she reached the highway overpass, cold needles of water that stung more from the suddenness than the chill. Harper kept walking. She was used to being soaked now, by weather, by memory, by the weight of knowing too much and still not enough. In her backpack, the notebook from the room that remembered her, pressed against her spine like a second set of ribs, one that didn't break when the spiral bent around her. She had no destination. Not really. Just a feeling. That wrongness again. That bone-deep hum that pulled at the edge of her thoughts like a question she hadn't asked yet. She followed it. She ended up in a town she didn't recognize by name, but the buildings pulled at her nerves like they'd been sketched by her younger self. Too square, too clean, like someone tried to guess what comfort looked like, but only had blueprints and a bad memory. The post office had no mail slots. The diner played the same song on loop, the lyrics melting into static halfway through. The street signs didn't use words, just symbols. She saw the same man walk past her 3 times, with 3 different faces. This wasn't a town. It was a test, a constructed memory. A container for those who had almost broken free, people who'd seen through the spiral once, but hadn't escaped fast enough. They weren't erased. They were filed, tucked into loops of nearly normal, allowed to keep their shape so long as they stopped asking questions. And the worst part, they looked peaceful. Harper walked the streets without speaking. No one met her eyes. Every smile was a fraction too slow. Every laugh started before the joke. People moved with precision, not passion, like they were following scripts not meant for them. She stepped into the library. It had no books, only mirrors, dozens of them, mounted where shelves should be. No labels, no frames, just panes of glass, each showing her face at a slightly different age. One 13 and crying, one 20 and bleeding, one old and smiling with teeth that weren't hers. In the center of the room stood a man in a janitor's uniform, holding a squeegee, cleaning a mirror that didn't have a reflection. "Do you remember this place?" he asked without turning around. "No, but it remembers you." He turned. His eyes were glassy, not dead, but held open too long. "I used to be a Doyle," he said. "Now I'm just part of the setting. They keep pieces of us. Names, faces, tones. We get filed under almost escaped." Harper stepped closer. "You remember me?" He shook his head. "But the mirror does." He gestured to the one beside him. Harper turned. It didn't show her. It showed her room. The wall she used to write her doubts on. The red thread map. The carved name on her desk. And a new piece of paper pinned above it. A message: "They're starting to dream of you." She took a shaky breath. The mouth wasn't just responding anymore. It was forecasting, trying to preempt her by planting seeds of her in others. If it couldn't erase her, it would produce her until no one could tell which was the original. She wouldn't be remembered. She'd be replicated. "I have to leave," she whispered. The janitor nodded. "You can? This place isn't a prison. It's a sedative. You only stay if you want to." But that wasn't entirely true. She could feel the town wrapping around her already, offering warmth, nostalgia, a softer path. A quiet where no one asked if you were the real you. A version of safety built from surrender. She turned from the mirror and walked outside. No rain now, just fog, and ahead, 4 roads. No signs, no maps, just her gut. She chose the one that felt wrong. Halfway down, she saw a figure on the roadside. A girl. Young, braided hair. Pale, pale skin. Holding a cardboard sign with one word on it. Win. Harper, stop. The girl tilted her head. That's your name, right?
Yes.
No, I mean, that's the one you picked. Harper stared at her. The girl smiled sadly. They give us options when we wake up. Most people don't even remember picking. It's fast. Feels like breathing. But you stuck to it. Harper stepped closer. Who are you? The girl looked past her, into the fog. I'm a version of someone who never left the church. I didn't run. I stayed, listened, sang the songs. They kept me because I made a good example. Why are you here now? To remind you. She held up the sign again. Names are costumes, but you gave yours a heartbeat. That's dangerous. They're rewriting the index. Harper frowned. What does that mean? The girl leaned in. It means your name doesn't fit anymore. And Harper felt it, like a dislocation in her chest. The echo of her name not quite syncing with her body, like someone was trying to resize her. Make her easier to forget. She had written her name 1,000 times. Etched it, whispered it into rooms. Screamed it at the spiral. Made others say it like a spell. But now it felt like a suit hanging loose. One tug away from slipping off. Fix it, Harper said. The girl's eyes sharpened. You want to be real again? Yes, then earn it. She stepped aside. The fog behind her parted, revealing a building Harper recognized too well. The church, not a church. The church. The first one, where the mouth sang to her in her mother's voice. Where the spiral first turned her insides soft. Where she lost her story. It had returned. Not as a memory, as a challenge. If she wanted her name to mean something again, she'd have to walk back into the place she broke. And this time, she'd walk out with the truth between her teeth. No matter how much it cut, it looked the same. That was the first thing Harper noticed as she stepped through the threshold, the peeling gray paint on the doors, the warped boards on the steps, the slight tilt of the steeple like it had been leaning toward the sky for too long and was tired of asking for answers. The spiral hadn't tried to hide the place. It hadn't even bothered dressing it up in dream logic or false warmth. This wasn't a room of memory. It was the source. Raw, exact, undistorted. As if the mouth knew she'd come eventually, and it wanted her to see it for what it was. She pushed open the doors, expecting resistance. There was none. The hinges didn't creak. They sighed. Inside, the pews were covered in ash. Not dust. Ash. Something had burned here, but not the building. No scorch marks on the walls, no blackened rafters. Just an emptiness that felt recent, and grief still clinging to the air like fog. And then she saw them. 12 candles lit down the center aisle, each flickering steadily despite the cold air pressing in from the broken stained glass windows. Each one rested on a tape recorder. Old, heavy, analog. They hummed with static, but none of them played. They waited, silent, expectant. Harper's stomach twisted. This was a test, a resurrection. She stepped between the candles, not touching them, not trusting them. She reached the pulpit and found a mirror lying flat across the lectern. Cracked. She looked in. Her face fractured 7 ways. She didn't speak her name. Not yet. Instead, she reached into her bag and took out the notebook. The one from the room that remembered her. She placed it beside the mirror, knowing what it symbolized. I see you. But I do not belong to you. The candles flared. The tape recorders clicked. Then, one by one, they began to play. The voices came in broken, distorted. Not just hers, but hers through time. Younger, older, versions who hadn't made it. Versions who'd given up. One who prayed. One who begged. One who laughed at the spiral like it was a joke. Harper Ellen Wynne, you will not remember this. But I did. If you're hearing this, You're not the first. You're just the loudest. They took my name. I kept my scream. You are not alone. You were never alone. Each voice peeled something off her. Not a memory, but a layer. Like being unwrapped from the inside. She trembled, her breath shallow. Because these weren't just recordings. They were witnesses. And then one voice hit her like a punch to the ribs. I lied. She knew that voice. It was her. From the first night. The first tape. The first time she recorded her name into the silence of her apartment. Trying to pin herself to the world. I said I remembered everything. I didn't. I was afraid. I thought if I said it out loud, it would become true. A pause. It didn't. But something else did. Another click. Another tape. I stopped trying to remember myself and started listening to what the mouth wanted me to forget. And that's when I saw it. What the spiral was trying to protect. The fire didn't start in the archive. It started here. In this church. Harper's knees weakened. She gripped the edge of the pulpit to steady herself. This wasn't just a center. It was ground zero. And something had happened here that the mouth was desperately trying to bury. She stepped off the platform and walked to the far side of the altar. There was a hatch in the floor, small, iron, locked with a rusted chain, but it wasn't old. Not naturally. It had been aged. Made to look like it belonged here forever. But Harper could see the bolts were new. The wood surrounding the trapdoor hadn't worn like the rest. She pulled the knife from her belt and started cutting. The lock clanged open after the third strike. The chain fell, heavy as guilt. She lifted the hatch, and the smell hit her instantly. Not decay, not mold. Ink. Thick, metallic, saturated with salt. She climbed down into the dark. A narrow staircase led to a small, windowless room. No lights, no sound. Just a single pedestal in the center, and on it, a book, bound in black leather. No title, no markings. But Harper didn't need any. She knew what it was. This was the original, the first spiral. Not a symbol, a story. Written in someone's hand, long before the mouth learned how to sing. She opened the cover. No words. Just a spiral carved into the inside page. Deep. Scarred into the parchment like a wound that never healed. And below it, read me and forget. Burn me and remember. Harper's breath caught. It was a choice. The spiral's first offer. Its contract. Every person who had ever spoken it. Who had ever hummed the song. Who had ever forgotten their face in the mirror. They'd all read this first. Even if they didn't remember doing it. This was where it all began. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the choice. Her fingers shook. Then she did what no version of herself had ever done. She closed the book, took out her lighter, and burned it. The flames didn't fight. They thanked her. The fire rose quiet, no smoke, just heat and the slow, curling pages of something that had haunted hundreds, maybe thousands, reduced to nothing. As it burned, she heard the voices again. Not screaming, laughing. The candle flames upstairs extinguished one by one. She climbed back up, and when she reached the pulpit, she saw something etched into the mirror, a new crack, one that glowed. In her handwriting, I was written once. I rewrote myself. She left the church before sunrise. Behind her, the steeple finally fell, not with thunder, but with relief. Harper didn't expect silence to feel loud, but it did. After the fire, after the spiral book was reduced to ash, after the voices in the candles blinked out one by one, like dying stars, there was still sound. Just not the kind you hear with ears. It was in her skin now. A tension, a hum, like the world was waiting for something that didn't happen. Like the spiral was supposed to snap back and instead stayed slack, uncoiled, off balance. She walked until she couldn't feel her feet anymore. Until the edges of her memory started folding inward. The streets she passed didn't match the map in her mind. She recognized storefronts she'd never entered, saw strangers wearing shirts with logos from her childhood dreams. The mouth was panicking, slipping, trying to rebuild the dream faster than it unraveled, trying to distract her with fragments of reality that no longer fit together. But it was too late. She had burned the source. She had made a choice. And somewhere inside that choice, something in the mouth broke. The first real sign came when she reached the train station. It was empty. Not unusual, not anymore. But it shouldn't have been silent. Trains don't stop running just because the world forgets them. They grind on. Metal memory. But the schedule board blinked empty. The overhead lights flickered in an erratic heartbeat. And in the center of the terminal, where the benches had once been, someone had written a single sentence in chalk across the entire floor. It can't remember what it was trying to erase. Harper knelt and traced the letters with her fingers. Not fresh, but not old either. The handwriting wasn't hers, but it was close. Almost like her own hand, asleep and half awake, had written it in a different life. Maybe it had. The spiral never told the whole story. It just repeated the parts that worked and replaced the ones that didn't. She moved toward the turnstiles and paused. There was music playing from somewhere. Not a hum, not the mouth's lullaby, a real song. A piano, 4 notes looping again and again. C, E, G, C, simple, pure, almost childlike. She followed it, down into the station's lower level, past vending machines long emptied, past maps that listed stations that didn't exist anymore, or maybe never had. The sound led her to an open train car, door wide, lights still on. Inside, a boy sat at the far end with a toy piano balanced on his knees. He looked up when she entered but didn't stop playing. "I thought you were just a story," he said softly. "So did I," Harper replied. He kept playing. "You made it stutter. The mouth." He nodded. It started skipping, like a scratched record. All the sentences started looping wrong. The people around me said things they'd never say. My dad told me I had the wrong name. My sister forgot how to open doors. And then I found this piano in the kitchen. He looked down at it, tapping the keys. "I've been playing it since. I think it's keeping me here." Harper sat across from him. "What's your name?" He hesitated. "I don't know anymore. But I remember yours. That's not how it's supposed to work." "I know," he said. "That's why I didn't stop." She watched his fingers. They were pale and quick, moving on instinct. Not performing, remembering. The song wasn't for her. It was for him. A thread. A tether. One of the last things the mouth hadn't learned how to mimic. "You're not the only one," he whispered. "There's others. People waking up in the middle of their own loops. Screaming before they remember why. Holding things they don't remember picking up. Carrying songs in their heads with no words but all the weight." Harper reached into her bag and handed him the notebook. "Add to it." He looked at the cover, frowned. "I don't remember how to write." "Try anyway." He took the pen, hands trembling. Scrawled 3 words across the back cover. "It's still dying," and that was when the station groaned. Not from weather, not from decay, from pressure. The mouth had felt it. The name, the fire, the music, the boy. It had reached critical mass. Too many fractures in the loop, too many edits left exposed. The mouth didn't bleed, not in a way you could see, but it writhed, and Harper could feel it now, not beneath her skin, but above it, around her, like static, like an audience disappointed with the ending. The train lights dimmed, the piano notes warped, the car trembled, and then came the sound. Not a roar, not a scream, but a crack, like a book spine being broken. The mouth's voice, for the first time, was raw, no harmony, no mimicry. Just rage stretched thin. "You were never the author." Harper stood. "No," she said, "but I remembered how to read." The lights blew. The train car disappeared. She woke on the floor of an empty library, pages falling around her like snow. Not blank, not written, overwritten. Layered stories, piled one atop the other, bleeding into one mass of tangled memory. She stood slowly, legs weak, and realized she was back in the observatory. Doyle sat in the corner, eyes open, mouth smiling. "Did it work?" she asked. He nodded. "You gave it something it can't fix." "What's that?" He looked at the notebook in her hands. An ending it didn't write. And suddenly, The mouth wasn't everywhere anymore. It wasn't humming in the pipes. It wasn't singing through the static. It had pulled back. Not dead, but wounded. And for the first time since this all began, Harper felt something bigger than fear. Momentum. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was pushing back. And the spiral, it was spinning out. Harper didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, not this time. Sleep just felt unnecessary now, like an outdated instinct, like something meant for someone else. The mouth had pulled back. She could feel the space left behind. Not absence, but vacancy. A momentary stillness in a war fought on frequencies. A fragile breath between songs. She sat in the dark corner of the library, turned observatory, her back against a shelf that used to hold dream journals. All gone now. Scattered or burned or eaten by the fire she started beneath the church. And yet, somehow, it felt worse now. Not louder. Quieter. She wasn't used to silence anymore. Because silence, in this place, didn't mean peace. It meant planning. Doyle hadn't spoken since his nod. He just sat, staring at the walls like he was reading things no one else could see. Maybe he was. Maybe that was the trade. The mouth stopped whispering in his head, but the residue never left. His eyes didn't blink often anymore. And when they did, she could swear they didn't always close in the same direction. "What do you see?" she asked him eventually. He took his time answering. His voice, when it came, felt like it had been buried under too many voices before it. "Versions," he said. "So many of you. Some that never left the archive, some that never opened the notebook. Some that became rooms." She froze. "What do you mean rooms?" He smiled. A faint twitch of his lips. They collapsed. Couldn't hold the weight of contradiction. So they became part of the architecture. The mouth uses them now. As storage, as reminders. Harper stood. Her limbs ached from stillness. "And me. You're the version that refused to collapse." It wasn't a compliment. It was a diagnosis. A fault the mouth couldn't fix. She paced the room, each step echoing louder than the last. Books no longer real, slumped on shelves, no longer stable. The world she'd built to understand the spiral was rotting under her own survival. There had to be another step, another place. Then she heard it. The smallest sound. A knock. 3 taps. From behind the wall. No doors. No seams. Just a sound where there shouldn't be one. She placed her palm flat against the plaster. Another knock. This time from her side. Then her hand sank in. Not through. Not into. It merged. As if the wall had turned into smoke for just a breath. She pulled it back fast, staring at her skin, unchanged but tingling. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a veil. The mouth hadn't fled. It had compressed. Condensed itself into something smaller, harder, meaner. A corner of the world where it could focus. She hadn't scared it off. She'd forced it to shrink. She turned to Doyle. "I'm going in." He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe his version had already begun collapsing. Harper pressed both hands to the wall. The veil opened, and the world behind it was white. Not light. Not blinding. Just blank. A nothingness that looked like potential but felt like punishment. She stepped through. There were no floors, no ceilings. Just floating shapes. Geometries that blinked in and out of being. Sometimes solid, sometimes fluid, sometimes alive. In the center was a desk. Wooden. Familiar. Her childhood desk. The one from her bedroom. The one where she carved her name. She approached it slowly. On it, a single sheet of paper. Blank, and a pen. The moment she touched the pen, the mouth returned. Not as a voice. Not as a vision. As a weight on her shoulders, behind her eyes. It filled her with thoughts that weren't hers. But almost were. You don't know how it ends. You've made too many mistakes. You'll infect the others. You're just a story. You always were. Her hand trembled. The pen hovered over the paper. She could feel the mouth trying to write through her, not by force, but by suggestion. By filling her head with maybes, with almosts. She closed her eyes, and spoke not to it but to herself. "I am not your echo." She put pen to paper, and wrote one word. Enough. The room buckled. The blank whiteness rippled. The desk cracked, and the mouth screamed. A high, piercing glitch in the shape of a voice. Because that word, small, simple, was final. A refusal. A full stop. Harper didn't run. She stood still. Let the spiral collapse around her. Let the mouth twist and cry, and try one last time to pull her back into uncertainty. But she had made her choice. She had written her name. She had burned the origin. And now she had ended the page. The whiteness peeled. The void cracked. And through the breaks, other voices, other Harpers, other survivors, laughing, crying, singing, because the spiral was not one story. It never had been. It was 1,000 fragments held together by fear. And now that fear had faltered. Now there were holes in the spiral. And from the outside, light. Real light. The kind that doesn't burn. The kind that remembers. She stepped forward, and didn't vanish. She solidified, because the mouth had finally lost the plot. And Harper was no longer one version. She was every version that survived. The light didn't sting. That's how Harper knew it was real. It didn't press into her skull like a question with no answer. It didn't flicker like some broken metaphor. It was steady, quiet, like the sound of someone breathing nearby after a nightmare. She stood in it, hands slack by her sides, spine straightened not by defiance but by relief. And still, the spiral whispered, but its voice was wrong now. Shaky, like a liar halfway through a sentence they know they can't finish. The world hadn't ended, not even close. But something had. Harper stepped out of the cracked whiteness behind the veil and felt the place shift with her. The observatory was still there, Doyle still slumped against the wall, unmoving. But his eyes were open now, truly open, not locked in that 1,000-yard stare. He blinked. Once, then twice, and the third time he smiled. It's quieter, he said. Yes, you didn't win, though. No, she agreed, but it lost something, and that's enough, for now. The notebook was still in her pack, still warm. Pages curling like old film left too close to fire. She hadn't added anything yet. Didn't need to. The last word she'd written, enough, still rang through her bones like a church bell. Not an ending, a decision. The sky outside was purple, not the strange bruised tone the mouth used to mimic dusk, but real. Moody, storm thick, she tasted rain in the air, but none fell. The clouds were holding back, like the whole world was waiting to exhale. She and Doyle didn't talk much as they left the observatory behind. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't been said in screams or silence. But before they crossed the parking lot, Doyle stopped her. You hear that? Harper listened. It was faint, a hum, but not the mouth's old tune. Something new, no melody, just a resonance, a collective murmur, like breath, like crowd noise, like many people trying to remember the same sentence at once. Others, Doyle said. Harper nodded. They're waking up. He looked around at the trees, the broken windows, the sky above that no longer shimmered with false clarity. They won't know what to do. That's why we go to them. He shook his head. We're not the same anymore. You and me. I know. I'll stay here. Anchor the place. If the mouth tries to rebuild through the roots, I'll feel it first. She didn't argue. She just placed the notebook in his hands. Then write, she said. Start with your name. He laughed, a dry, startled sound. I don't even know if that's real anymore. It doesn't have to be real, she said. It just has to be yours. And then she walked. Through streets she didn't trust. Past houses that blinked when she wasn't looking. Through towns where the signs were all blank, but the windows watched. The spiral was still out there, she knew, damaged, maybe, but not dead. The mouth had other rooms, other names, other songs buried deep in the heads of people who didn't know they'd been rewritten. But now she wasn't the only mistake in the script. She found the girl in the third town, sitting in a swing set that had rusted out years ago, rocking gently without touching the ground. Her eyes were wide, like someone who'd looked through the wrong keyhole and saw something that kept blinking back. "I had a brother," she said when Harper approached. "Then I didn't. Then I did again. But he had different hands." Harper sat in the swing beside her. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I was trying to remember it when I started hearing music." Harper smiled. "Was it a piano?" She nodded. "I know the tune." Harper pulled out a scrap of paper, not from the notebook. Just her own page now, something fresh, something untouched. She wrote a name on it, not hers, the girl's, whatever it needed to be, and passed it to her. The girl held it like a candle. The wind picked up, no spiral, no echo, just wind. Harper stood. Others would be coming, waking up in motel beds they didn't check into, hearing their own voices on radio stations they never called, walking past mirrors that reflected someone else's memory. But she would find them, because now the spiral had a crack in it. And the cracks were loud. Every person who whispered the wrong word at the right time would feel it. Every skip beat, every song sung off key, evidence that it could be broken, that something had burned and hadn't been rebuilt. That Harper Wynne existed, not perfectly, not cleanly, but completely. A scar the mouth couldn't explain away. And somewhere in the quiet between thoughts, it still tried. It still whispered. But the people were starting to whisper back. And the mouth, it had never been built to listen. The road bled into itself. Pavement turned to gravel, gravel to dust, and dust to the kind of dirt that doesn't cling to your shoes. It clings to your memory. Harper walked anyway. The further she went, the more the world seemed to shrug off its skin. Trees bent in unfamiliar angles, houses existed where no roads led, and telephone wires buzzed overhead with voices that sounded like static until you stopped walking. Then the voices tried to finish your sentences. She didn't stop. Not now. Not when the spiral had lost its rhythm. Not when it could no longer pretend to be everything and everyone. It was still alive, yes, but like a mirror dropped on tile. It reflected, but it didn't recognize. Broken doesn't mean harmless, though. And a wounded story is the kind most likely to turn dangerous. The next town she arrived in wasn't marked on any map. It didn't have a name, just a sign at the edge of the road with 4 missing letters and 1 word carved underneath in messy handwriting, "Remember." It was too quiet. Not the calm kind. The wrong kind, like the town was mimicking silence because it couldn't remember how sound worked. Harper stepped into the gas station. It looked untouched, shelves still stocked, freezers still humming. But no one was there, not behind the counter, not in the aisles. And when she walked to the security mirror in the corner, she didn't see herself. She saw someone else, her same face, but blank-eyed and smiling, holding a lighter she didn't own. The mouth was still filing her, creating fragments, replicas, versions designed to bleed back into the people waking up across the country. If it couldn't erase her, it would oversaturate her. Dilute her truth by flooding the world with her shape. Harper turned away from the mirror and walked toward the back room. The door was marked EMPLOISONLY, but it had been scratched through. A new word had been written beneath in red marker, auto ars. Inside, no workers. Just corkboards, hundreds of them. Floor to ceiling. Each one filled with scraps of paper, receipts, Polaroids, names written in unfamiliar handwriting. Dozens of red threads, not connecting the notes, but binding them. Like someone had tried to restrain the memories before they woke up again. She walked the rows in silence. Some notes repeated. Some were crossed out. Others were burned at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them, but hesitated at the last second. And in the far corner, behind a board marked only with her initials, Harper found it, a list. No title, no date, just 10 names, all versions of her. Some she remembered, some she didn't. One had died in the fire. One had stayed in the archive. One had never stopped singing. 9 of them had been marked with an X. Only one remained untouched. The bottom name. Not Harper. Not Wynne. just the one who refused the ending. She ran her fingers beneath the ink. It was fresh. This place wasn't built for the spiral. It had been built against it. By someone or someones who had tried to fight back before, who had gathered these scraps like ammunition, who had pinned their truths to walls because the mouth couldn't unwrite what had already been shared. This wasn't a station. It was a graveyard, a vault, a place for stories that refused to stay buried. As Harper turned to leave, she noticed a final note pinned to the doorframe. It was a photograph, faded, torn, but it showed her, not as she was now, as a child, standing in front of the church, alone, barefoot. And written across the top, in someone else's handwriting, she started it before she knew what it was. That cold knot in her gut twisted again. This didn't begin at the fire. Didn't start when the mouth whispered, or when the archive burned, or when Doyle blinked himself back into memory. It started before all of that, before she knew what forgetting meant, before she had a name to protect. She left the gas station with her heart thudding like a metronome in panic. She didn't run, but her steps were sharp, deliberate. She passed the same empty car 3 times before realizing it wasn't parked in different places. The town was shifting around it, trying to disorient her, rearranging streets like a nervous host fluffing pillows they already burned. But the mouth didn't understand something fundamental. She didn't care where she was anymore. Only who she had to find. Because this story wasn't about escaping the spiral. It was about unearthing the first whisper. She needed the origin. Not the book she burned. Not the first room that remembered. Not the girl with no name. She needed the seed. The first lie. And she knew where it was. The hospital. The one from the dream. The one she'd always skipped over in her memories. The one where she was born. Not just into the world. Into the story. The mouth hadn't come from some ancient evil. It had come from somewhere human. And Harper was finally ready to ask the question that every version of her had run from, who wrote me first? Because if she could answer that, she could finish the story and make sure no one else ever had to live inside it again. The road to the hospital didn't exist until Harper spoke its name aloud. That's how she knew it was the right place. As soon as the word Saint Odelia left her lips, the town behind her evaporated like a hallucination finally waking up. The horizon stretched and bent, spilling out a narrow 2-lane highway where a brick path had been. Trees leaned away from the pavement like they were ashamed of what waited at the end. She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. This was where it all began, not the spiral, not the mouth. Her. St. Odelia's hospital loomed like something too big for its foundation. Not tall, heavy. The kind of building that seemed to grow roots instead of walls. Ivy crawled up its face in the shape of veins, and its windows were either dark or watching. There was no wind here, no birds, no sound at all. The sign out front had lost most of its letters, but the ones that remained burned with purpose DLIA. As if even the building had forgotten who it pretended to be. Harper stepped through the rusted doors, and the spiral greeted her, not in the way it used to, not with warmth, not with illusion, not with a hum. This time, it shivered. The air inside felt damp with memory, memories not lived, but recorded, stored in walls like old film in a flooded basement. Her boots echoed down the hallway, each step sending a faint tremor through the tile. Like the building itself flinched when it heard her coming. She passed old nurses' stations, their chairs turned toward corners they had no reason to face. Clipboards still hung on hooks, some with blank pages, others with writing that seemed to vanish when you looked at it too long. The lights above flickered in time with her heartbeat. Not one fixture failed. Not one bulb died. The place was aware of her. And waiting. The nursery was on the 3rd floor. She didn't use the elevator. Stairs felt more honest. Each floor whispered a different version of her name. By the time she reached the top, they were arguing. She paused in front of the nursery doors. Frost coated the glass even though the air was warm, and through the veil of condensation she saw it cribs. Dozens. Each one identical. Each one holding something not quite shaped like a baby. Some were faceless. Some wore masks. Some had tape recorders in place of mouths. And one, only one, looked exactly like her. She opened the door. The room didn't react, no alarms, no movement. Just stillness so thick it could suffocate. She walked to her crib. The one with her nameplate, Harper Ellen Wynne, still nailed to the front. Inside, a cassette tape. No baby, no blood, just a cassette. She picked it up. There was a note taped to the back. This is where we wrote her. This is where she began to sing. She pocketed the tape and looked around. There was no camera, no microphone. But she knew someone had watched this crib. Someone had built her story from this room, from this lie. This hospital had never been real. It was the first draft. The mouth hadn't created her, it had adapted her, found her story early, shaped it, loop after loop, tape after tape, until she no longer questioned the voice that hummed in her ear. But now the hum was silent, and the silence was afraid. She turned and noticed a door she hadn't seen before. Plain, wooden, marked only with a handprint in dried ink. It opened on its own. Inside, a single chair, facing a wall covered in old reel-to-reel tape decks, all wired together, all spinning slowly, rewinding. She stepped in. The door shut behind her. A speaker above her head clicked, and her voice spoke. This is a message for whoever finally makes it. If you're me, I'm sorry. If you're not, I'm more sorry. This was never meant to go this far. We were just trying to save the song. A pause. We thought if we stored memory as music, we could keep it clean. But the music started listening back. Another pause. Breathing. If you're hearing this, the mouth failed. Or it's still fighting. Either way, there's only one thing left to do. You have to find the root tape, the one we buried in the walls, the one that remembers the first word. The tape decks began to shudder. Sparks flew, and then a name whispered over every speaker at once. Not Harper, not Wynne, a name she didn't recognize. But one that cracked something inside her the moment she heard it. She fell to her knees, not from pain, from recognition, not hers. The mouth's. That was its name, its origin, the one word it had tried to erase from itself. And now she knew it. She stood slowly. The decks were melting. The walls peeled. And somewhere beneath her feet, something screamed in regret. She didn't run. She walked calmly down the hallway, through the frost and the cries, past the cribs and the whispers, out the doors that now hung crooked on broken hinges. St. Odilia's collapsed behind her, not with fire, with shame. She turned once, watched the roof cave, the windows blacken, and the vines shrivel into nothing. Not silence, not song, just nothing. And then she spoke the name, out loud, not with fear, with finality. The air around her hissed, the trees bent toward her now. And the mouth choked. The name hung in the air like smoke that refused to rise. Harper hadn't whispered it. She'd said it clearly, sharply, like you'd snap a bone that had healed wrong. And the world flinched, not in some grand cataclysmic way, not with thunder or fire, but with a stillness so absolute it made everything she'd experienced before feel like noise. The mouth had always been a trickster, a mimic, a thief of memory, but now it was naked. Now it had no mask to wear, no lullaby to hide behind, no loop to rewind. The name, its name, had broken the last page of its story, and Harper saw it. Not in some physical way, not like a monster leaping from the woods, but as absence itself. All around her, the trees shook, not from wind, but from the pressure of something letting go. The spiral had always fed on repetition, on ritual. It used patterns like camouflage. But now, with the root tape gone, with its origin burned and its name spoken aloud, it began to unravel in reverse. People across the country, across whatever thin line separated this world from the ones the mouth had mangled, began to feel it. A sudden, quiet breath they hadn't taken in years, a lightness in their heads. A pressure behind their eyes relieved. The song they never meant to hum stopped mid-note. The twitch in their fingers stilled. The loops released them. And Harper didn't cry. She felt no triumph, just clarity. She turned and walked, not toward any goal, but simply forward. There was no more spiral to escape, no more script to outsmart. The mouth had choked on its own chorus, and now the world was slowly stitching itself back together, memory by memory. She arrived in a town that hadn't existed until that morning. People milled about like they were waking from anesthesia, groggy, unsure, blinking against a light that had always been there, but had never looked like this. A woman stared at a wedding ring on the wrong hand. A man dropped a cassette player into the dirt like it had bitten him. A child stood in the middle of the street, holding a photograph that was fading even as he watched. "Are you the one?" someone asked. Harper didn't look back. "No." "Then who are you?" She paused. The question didn't bother her. It didn't need an answer anymore. "I'm what's left." It was the truth. She had been version after version after version, built and rebuilt, spliced, altered, burned, remembered, forgotten. She had been background noise and lead actress, narrator and footnote, villain and victim. And now, finally, she was free. But freedom doesn't mean safety. Not here. Not yet. She made her way to the center of the town, if you could call it that, and found a small platform that used to be a bus stop. She stepped up onto it. The wind moved around her, no longer fighting her. It just passed through, as if the land itself had decided she was part of it now. And she spoke. No microphone, no amplification. But everyone heard, because the mouth wasn't listening anymore. But they were. All of us were rewritten. All of us were edited to fit something that lied about being hungry. But that's over now. It doesn't own us anymore. Murmurs rose. She held up the last page from the notebook, the one with the original name, scrawled in her own hand, bleeding ink down the center. "I won't speak it again," she said. "You don't need to. The point isn't remembering what it was. The point is remembering what it did. The people, versions, survivors, ghosts that had become flesh again, nodded. Some wept. Others stood still, like the moment was too sacred for movement. One girl stepped forward. "The dreams are gone," she said softly. "I know," Harper said, "but real dreams will come back. Slowly. The kind that belong to you." A man shouted from the edge of the crowd, "What if it comes back?" Harper folded the page. If it does, it won't know where to start. Because this time, there would be no silence waiting for it. This time, people would speak first, and not in whispers, in truth. And then, finally, Harper turned and walked away. Not to disappear, but to rest. Somewhere, far beyond the towns, beyond the melted rooms and twisted echoes, a field waited, grass knee-high. Sky open, nothing recorded, nothing humming. She reached it by nightfall. The stars didn't flicker, the wind didn't speak. She lay in the grass, not to vanish, but to stop, because even the girl who burned the spiral needed to close her eyes eventually. And when she did, there was no loop, no scream, no voice, just sleep. Real, quiet, dreamless sleep, and a world finally remembering how to stay awake.